Romanian Eagle. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 626 Air Force, Part 2. This will not work. Paratroopers are ground combat troops. It is nothing more than airborne behind enemy lines through transport aircraft to occupy strategic points. Its combat method is also the same as that of the army, and the Air Force controls what the paratroopers do. Admiral Farid, who did not obstruct the ground air defense force, was blown away when he heard that Anchorage would also place the paratroopers under the jurisdiction of the Air Force. Of course, in front of Edel, it is impossible for him to say anything radical, but his intentions have been shown, and there is no room for negotiation. And Admiral Farid is very optimistic about the future of paratroopers, because it opens up new ideas for infantry combat. The use of aircraft to transport it to the enemy's rear, occupying points and bridges can effectively help the frontal battlefield, and this is an unforgivable combat method for the army. Of course, as the future head of the Air Force, Anchorage would not give up just like that, even if the other party was his original boss. I saw him continue to say, although the paratroopers are ground operations, they want to insist on Air Force support behind enemy lines. All these require the Air Force to grasp the battlefield situation in order to provide the most powerful support. If it is placed under the command of the Air Force, then its relationship with the Air Force will be better. The cooperation will be closer and more conducive to fighting behind enemy lines. Although Anchorage has some truth in what he said, Admiral Farid is not a person who gives up easily. I saw him retorted the same. You also know that paratroopers need cooperation, so the paratroopers are under the command of the Air Force. So how can they cooperate more effectively with the army troops? Moreover, the paratroopers are always ground troops, and operations still require the cooperation of other arms. And you also saw in the exercise that without the cooperation of the frontal troops, the paratroopers are just meat sent to the opponent's mouth. No matter how many aircraft cooperate, they will still face the fate of failure. Moreover, in the future combat imaginary enemy, its ground troops are more than our countries, and the use of paratroopers always needs to be applied to key points, which will lead to huge difficulties, so the need for the army's cooperation is greater than the right Air Force needs. Admiral Farid eloquently said a rationale, the core of which is that the paratroopers should be under the command of the army. Facing the words of Admiral Farid, Anchorage was also unwilling to give up. But paratroopers. Edel watched the debate between the two as an eye-opener. The two debated for a long time, from the combat system to the command, and then to who has a better understanding of the use of paratroopers. However, in the end, no one persuaded the other for the very simple reason that neither of them were willing to let go. Both of them are very optimistic about the paratroopers, which has only one regiment. So don't hesitate to fight for it. This belongs to the paratroopers who can do it. In the end, the lawsuit came to Edel. Looking at the two big men in the army, who were looking at him eagerly, he could only laugh bitterly. According to the development of history, paratroopers should indeed belong to the Air Force, but Farid has been in the army for so many years, there is no credit or hard work. And in these years, his credit is indeed not small, and he has contributed a lot to the military. Although people can't just remember credits, but Edel is a human being, not a machine. He also has feelings, and he should take care of his feelings for familiar people. So in the end he said, the two generals said there is a road, but there is only one paratrooper. Instead, the Air Force is responsible for training the paratroopers, and then transfers them to the Army command when they are in combat. Edel's and muddy practices made the paratroopers battle become a thing of the past. However, in the future, Edel has already planned to take the opportunity to transfer the paratroopers to the Air Force. As for now, let Anchorage be patient for a while. And after Edel pressed the paratroopers fight, the two old foxes looked at each other, and Farid started to talk about the next topic. His Majesty's assignment of responsibilities for the Air Force has been clarified, so the allocation of funds should also be given some support. We in the army believe that the 140 million lei funds previously allocated to the Army Aviation and Ground Air Defense Forces can be allocated by the Air Force takes over, and the annual research funding of 61 million lei allocated to the new fighter jets can also be taken over by the Air Force. After Admiral Ferried finished speaking, Admiral Lomadin followed. Our Navy will also allocate 41 million lei to the Air Force point. If it had been 2 years earlier, the words of the Army and Navy would have moved Ankarella. Because Romania's annual military expenditure was only 2.133 billion lei at that time, if you fight for it yourself, it will be very possible to reach 18%. However, with the expansion of the army, Romania's military expenditure this year reached 2.81 billion lei. That's not bad for a result of 12%. And these 2 consecutive speeches made Anchorage know the seriousness of the competition for military spending for the first time. However, just refuting directly like this would appear to be very incompetent, so Anchorage, who calmed down, said immediately, "Thank you for your support to the Air Force, but these military expenses are not enough for the Air Force. At present, the establishment of the Air Force requires a lot of money, and the development of new aircraft in the future still needs to continue, especially the 4-engine and twin-engine bombers, that are very important to our country, and it can be beneficial to deter opponents. You two have read the book on air supremacy." Anchorage's question was exchanged for silence, and he continued to speak regardless of whether the 2 generals answered or not. This book is very specific about the role of the Air Force. The Air Force can strike the rear of the opponent, slow down the enemy's build-up, and also increase the war weariness of the opponent's population. Therefore, the Air Force needs to be expanded to make Romania more deterrent. In order to increase military spending, Anchorage did not hesitate to tout the Air Force's capabilities and douse their supremacy. It's just that the 2 generals didn't buy into his words. "Our army can do that too." Having control of the sea can better explain the problem. Obviously Anchorage's words were of no use. The reason is very simple. The bird decides the head. Since they are the spokespersons of their respective military services, they must seek benefits for their own military services. Even if this proposal is obviously correct, who can face it calmly when it damages the interests of their army, navy, and army? No matter what they do to convince their subordinates, of course, it's another matter if you can't compete. But the Air Force must have enough hard-faced reasons, otherwise who would want to hand over their interests to others? So in the face of the rebuttals of the 2 army and navy bosses, Anchorage was not discouraged and said immediately, "The Romanian Air Force is under more pressure than the army and navy. In the Soviet Union, which is our main threat, a large number of new domestic aircraft such as I-16 and I-15 have been successfully developed, which has a great impact on our country. Since the fighters currently listed in our country are much better, this is a severe test for our country. And my country's demand for new aircraft is also extremely urgent. So in order to deal with this threat, the Air Force needs sufficient funds to purchase new aircraft, to ensure that air supremacy is always in our hands. So I hope that in terms of funding, this can be taken into account. After all, the Air Force also has to protect the safety of the people and the military." Anchorage said this for the sake of it, so the 2 of them couldn't stare at each other. Admiral Safarid spoke up. "Since this is the case, in order to ensure that the Air Force can protect the safety of the citizens and compete for the advantage of the airspace, the army can, and then can move the cost of 30 million lei." Seeing that the army had let go, Admiral Lomadin also continued, "Our navy can set aside 20 million yuan, and the navy needs to save for a long time now." Being able to let them relax so quickly has something to do with what Anchorage said, but it doesn't have much to do with it. More importantly, as the king, Edel looked at them with a playful look, which made it difficult for them to bully the Air Force brothers too much. And Anchorage, who didn't react, thought that there was a door to this matter, and wanted to continue talking, but was immediately stopped. Okay, Anchorage. Anchorage, who heard Edel's speech, immediately stopped. Then Edel continued, "The Navy and the Army each have an additional 20 million lei to help the Air Force grow. This matter is settled." After speaking, he patted Anchorage on the shoulder, turned and left, leaving only the 3 of them to experience it themselves. And Anchorage didn't know that at this time, if it wasn't for His Majesty's help this time, it would be impossible for him to be the opponent of the 2 generals. It seems that the Air Force will still have a long time to compete for funding in the future. The latest chapter address of Romanian Eagles. Romanian Eagle full text reading address /43229 Romanian Eagle txt download address Romanian Eagle mobile read /43229 for the convenience of reading. Next time, you can click favorites below to record the reading record of this time, chapter 629 Air Force, part 2, and you can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like Romanian Eagle, please recommend this book to your friends. Questions, blog, WeChat, etc. Thank you for your support. Chapter 627 The end of 1935. The following days in 1935, Romania spent in a slow expansion of the army. In the world, Edel's old friend of the Civil War in the Far East is also heading for a staged victory. The communist armed forces were forced to relocate, and their base in Jiangxi was nearly occupied. In this battle, the army adapted from the advisory group of Rhodes played a decisive role. Therefore, Edel's old friend, who temporarily relieved his confidant, is more urgent to promote the reform of his army. Because the Japanese have become more and more restless in North China, he urgently needs more weapons and equipment to adapt more troops. So Nanjing proposed to continue the plan, to exchange raw materials for weapons as for Nanjing's request. The two countries agreed. Among them, the German side needs industrial raw materials and its own foreign exchange is not sufficient. As for the Romanian side, it is also to expand exports. Because with the Romanian facelift, a lot of old equipment has been withdrawn from active service. The destruction of these equipment will cost money, and it will take up space to store them. It is better to sell them for some raw materials, although these equipments seem to be out of step with the times in Europe. For Nanjing, they are happy to receive these very well maintained equipment. Because the price is a lot worse than the new equipment, the performance is not much different. Therefore, Nanjing is willing to accept this batch of cheap and high quality weapons. So in 1935, Romania transported up to 520 million lei, enough to equip 11 divisions. Of course, in addition to collecting rags from Romania, the German Fanziden and the Marrow are still breaking out. Germany also exported 110 million Reichsmark weapons in 1935. Of course, in addition to the Far East, the long-running Ethiopian war also came to an end. Italy went through a change of coaches and an increase in troops, and finally on April 21, 1935, the main force of the Egyptian army was defeated at Mechonia Lake Ashanti. On June 2, Selassie went into exile in England. On June 5, the Italian army occupied Addis Ababa. On the 9th, Mussolini announced the annexation of Ethiopian territory to Italy. Although Italy occupied Ethiopia, the war brought huge casualties to Italy, with nearly 100,000 killed and 43,000 wounded. Although Ethiopia's mountainous terrain limited the Italian army's play, its huge casualties made all countries praise the heroic Italian army. However, the upper level command of its army is rigid, its tactics are backward, and its equipment is backward, which cannot be concealed. In particular, the equipped Breeder 6.5mm light machine gun and Mannlicher Carcano rifle are superb. The Breeder 6.5mm light machine gun has its unique sideways magazine, which causes the center of gravity to shift. The mass of the whole gun, without the magazine, minus 10.34 kilograms, can be described as the big fat man in the light machine gun. However, its weight does not bring a higher rate of fire. The maximum theoretical firing rate of 500 rounds per minute cannot be achieved at all because of the unreasonable design. It can be said that it can compete with the Taisho Type 11 light machine gun, crooked handle, Uliang point. As for the Carcano rifle, there is no need to explain too much. In 1890, Italian chief engineer Salvador Carcano designed the Carcano M1891 rifle at the Turin arsenal with reference to the pasta maker's rolling pin. Replaces the bizarre 10.4x47R M1870 Vitry black powder rifle. The Carcano rifle is 1285mm long and has a small caliber of 6.5mm. The 6.5 *52mm rifle bullet it selected was the weakest standard full power bullet at that time point. The Carcano rifle is fed by a leak clip, which in turn draws on the design of the M1888 committee leak clip, and it only adds a round. And the previous Vitry rifle has 4-shot clips and Carcano 6-shot clips. Italians can't count 5. The Carcano rifle uses a unique progressive rifling. The shorter the wrap near the muzzle, the faster the warhead rotates. The gun has good accuracy. However, what is surprising is that the Italians are chaotic in the management of ammunition, and the sources of Carcano ammunition are different. So the initial velocity of Carcano ranges from 600 meters to 750 meters per second, and the ballistic trajectory is very random. Everyone depends on luck. Compared with the Japanese 38 type rifle of the same caliber, the Carcano rifle is completely incomparable. Therefore, this is also one of the main reasons why the Italian army suffered so many casualties before. Mountain warfare requires higher quality of individual soldiers and weapons. Of course, Italy is still capable of defeating backward countries. However, as for the power players, their combat capabilities are unknown. Although the overall capability of the Italian army is poor, it still has excellent units. For example, the mountain troops stationed in the mountains of northern Italy facing France are their elites, and their naval strength is still worthy of recognition. Of course there are other things going on in the world, but that's not something to focus on. However, in 1935, Romania paid more attention to its military upgrade point. Although this year was affected by the weakening of the stimulus of additional currency issuance, driven by the military and shipbuilding industry, Romania's economic growth stopped falling and stabilized, returning to 7% again. This year, Romania's GDP reached 82.74 billion lei, ranking 4th in Europe and 5th in the world. Among them, Romania's steel production reached 5.78 million tons, which is already on par with France. The output of grain has also reached 23.84 million tons, which can not only meet domestic demand, but also the scale of its export is not small. And under the influence of Eda's ascension to the Bulgarian king, the total population of Romania and Bulgaria has now reached more than 43 million people. It ranks 4th in Europe, surpassing France and Italy in one fell swoop, and the gap with the United Kingdom is narrowing. At the same time, in terms of exports, although it is affected by the economic downturn, but Romania is still growing by expanding into other markets. Not much, though, with only a 4.1% increase in exports. In terms of imports, Romania's demand for raw materials, especially rubber, tungsten ore, tung oil, bristle and other military raw materials, increased greatly due to the impact of the expansion of the military, which led to a 12.4% increase in Romania's imports in 1935. Of course, from this point of view, Romania is also on the road of expanding its arms and preparing for war. However, compared with Germany, Romania, which has a better economic environment, is much easier to expand its armaments. However, considering the differences in the national conditions of the two countries, this is not a good comparison point. In addition to the growth of the economy and population, the Romanian army also reached a new high this year, with a total strength of 540,000 naval and air force officers and soldiers, making Romania's expansion less difficult. And in 1935, that's how it went. Since 1936, the smoke of gunpowder over Europe has allowed more people to smell it, but they don't know how these visionaries should choose. Chapter 628 Entering the Rhine. After entering 1936, the world immediately paid attention to a major event, that is, the German army once again entered the Rhine demilitarized zone. In the early morning of February 29th, a German army consisting of 19 infantry battalions and 12 artillery companies, about 30,000 people in total, entered the Rhine demilitarized zone. 3 of the battalions crossed the Rhine and advanced towards Aachen, Trier and Saarbrücken, where Germany borders Belgium and France. At 10 am, the German foreign minister summoned the French, British and Italian ambassadors to Germany to Wilhelmstrasse, where the German Foreign Office is located, and handed them a note abrogating the Locarno Convention and a notice of the German troops entering the Rhine demilitarized zone. There is also a new peace program proposed by Germany. The French ambassador, François Poncy, who attended the summons, later recalled this. Hitler slapped his opponent, and in doing so he said, "I propose you peace." And 2 hours after the Germans marched into the Rhineland, Hitler once again demonstrated his provocative oratory genius from the parliamentary pulpit. William Shirer, a well-known American journalist who attended the congressional speech, described the scene at that time. After discussing the disadvantages of the Treaty of Versailles and the threat of Bolshevism, Hitler calmly declared that Germany was no longer bound by the Locarno Convention due to the entry into force of the Franco-Soviet Mutual Assistance Treaty. It has re-established Germany's absolute and unrestricted sovereignty in the demilitarized zone, although Hitler appeared to be very composed in his congressional speech. He was very guilty and nervous inside. He later admitted, "The 48 hours after the march into the Rhineland was the most nerve-wracking time of my life. If the French had entered the Rhineland at that time, we would have had to retreat with our tails tucked in, because what we had at our disposal was that little bit of military power. Even for a little resistance is totally insufficient." When the German General Staff received the initial message from Paris that France had ordered 13 divisions to go to the Maginot Line on the French-German border, General Baker, the German Army Chief of Staff, demanded the withdrawal of the 3 battalions of German troops that had crossed the Rhine. These senior German generals believed that the French would not fail to take action this time on matters concerning their national security. However, Hitler, with his gambler psychology and special political sense, continued to bet on the estimation that Britain and France would not take actual sanctions, and rejected the general's suggestion to withdraw troops. Although if Britain and France really intervene militarily, not only will the German army have to retreat with its tail between its tails, but it will likely mean the downfall of Hitler himself and the communist regime. But I have to admit that Hitler was indeed very visionary, and he seized the best opportunity. Italy began to change its attitude. Even if it did not support Germany, it would not oppose it. Italy and Germany had sharp contradictions. On the Austrian issue before, it has always been opposed to Germany's military expansion and preparations with Britain and France. However, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, the United Kingdom advocated the League of Nations to sanction Italy, while Germany adopted neutrality and provided a lot of aid to Italy during the war. So in one private, Italy assured Germany that Germany would not intervene in future marches, and the United Kingdom has obtained satisfactory results from the Germans on the issue of naval arms control not long ago, and will not take military action against Germany on this issue. You must know that the United Kingdom has always adopted a continental balance of power in Europe, and France is suspected of being a dominant player in Europe. It is also beneficial to have a German team, the United Kingdom, to contain the strength of France. In addition, the British economy is also a mess. In the second half of 1931, the gold standard system that had been implemented for several centuries was abandoned. The British economy has not recovered yet. As for France, which has the most relations, the French political arena has been extremely chaotic for many years. Left and right parties, pointing to each other, have seriously dragged down the development of the French economy. Moreover, the Franco-Soviet Mutual Aid Treaty just passed by the French House of Representatives gave Hitler an excuse. He attacked the Franco-Soviet Mutual Assistance Treaty as bringing communism into the European stage and incompatible with the obligations set out in the Locarno Convention, claiming that it brings an element of legal insecurity. The treaty stipulates that when either side of France or the Soviet Union becomes the target of aggression by a European country, the two countries pledge to immediately support and assist each other. The Franco-Soviet Mutual Assistance Treaty did violate the Locarno Convention on the peaceful settlement of disputes between Germany and France. However, Hitler deliberately ignored the fact that France chose to be close to the Soviet Union because of concerns about Germany's return to the compulsory military system in 1935. Germany, which resumed the compulsory military system, rapidly expanded its military strength to 350,000. It was seeing the rapid recovery of German military strength that France chose to approach the Soviet Union. Therefore, in the face of the German army's entry into the Rhine demilitarized zone, France did not give a strong counterattack, but only transferred 12 divisions to the French-German border to strengthen defense. In fact, France also has its own difficulties. In addition to the above reasons, France suffered too many casualties in World War I, and the general war weariness of the people was very serious. Politicians dare not do things that displease the people, so they can only watch German troops occupy the Rhine demilitarized zone. As for Germany's eastern neighbor Poland, the mood is even more complicated. Despite the German-Polish non-aggression pact of 1934, Poles remained wary of Germany. As a long-term ally of France, Poland believes that France will never tolerate Germany's entry into the Rhineland, so on March 9th, it proposed to France that the military alliance between the two countries will come into effect. When it was discovered that France had no intention of taking action, the Polish government was embarrassed by its self-indulgence and had to explain it to Berlin, Hitler said. He understood the Polish government's difficulties. The other European allies of Britain and France, especially France, were all chilled by this and began to adjust their policies to adapt themselves to the new pattern of power balance in Europe. Even Belgium and the Netherlands, which have always been allied with Britain and France, declared their neutrality successively. In the face of Germany's entry into the Rhine demilitarized zone, what does Romania, an important member of Europe, think? Edel said, move a bench and sit and watch. At present, Germany and Romania have good relations, and the military cooperation between the two countries has satisfied each other. As an excellent statesman, Hitler certainly did not forget Romania. Before the start of the march, Hitler had used the ambassador to test Romania's attitude. To this end, Edel said that Romania believes that Germany should have the right to station troops in its own territory. Hitler, who was overjoyed, openly said to others, Romania is a true friend of Germany. Yes, Edel would like to see Germany rearm. Without Germany breaking the Versailles system, how can Romania be allowed to fish in troubled waters? To this end, Edel also needs a magic weapon to ensure the interests of Romania. Chapter 629 Cooperation with the Jews. 1. Of course, what makes Edel so tempted is of course the famous atomic bomb. Unfortunately, there are no well-known nuclear physicists in Romania. Einstein, whom Edel had coveted before, for some reason, refused to come to Romania. However, according to gossip, the history of Romanian anti-Semitism led by Edel was known to the Jews. However, this news has not been confirmed, but the fact that Einstein will not come is certain. Since the great god didn't come, Edel could only think of another way. Did butchers still eat pigs with hair? Then Romania sent invitations to many nuclear physicists, such as Fermi, Heisenberg and Bohr. However, these well-known scientists may not be short of funds, or Romania has no status in the scientific community, and they all refuse the invitation from Romania. Only 2 or 3 kittens responded to Romania's invitation. Since these well-known scientists are not interested in Romania's invitation, they can only dig inside. Fortunately, there are no well-known nuclear physics scientists in Romania, and Edel has found several in other aspects. The most famous of them is Skradina, who is currently working at the Institute of Advanced Physics in Bucharest, and established wave mechanics on the basis of de Broglie's matter wave theory. However, although Skradina was also a physicist, he was unable to preside over the research of nuclear physics, because his major was not appropriate. And Edel can only pull up from the dwarf, and choose a scientist from Romania. Ploiesti from Buzău became the head of the Romanian nuclear test. Ploiesti studied at the University of IRC, and then at the University of Munich, where he studied quantum mechanics and atomic physics under Arnold Sommerfeld, and then, on the recommendation of his mentor, went to the University of Göttingen to continue his studies. When I got back to Romania, I taught at the University of Bucharest, and did my own experiments. When Edel was preparing to conduct secret nuclear bomb research, he immediately fell in love with Heisenberg's brother Ploiesti, who is devoted to research. The royal family's support for his research in atomic physics is simply something he can't ask for. Therefore, he was responsible for the research and development of the newly established Institute of Atomic Physics. However, the process of research and development is also full of difficulties, mainly because there is no clear goal. Because the nuclear test that Edel knew was the bombardment of uranium-235 with neutrons, how to bombard it, and the conditions required for the bombardment, it was simply a shame for the transmigrator. So Ploiesti needs to use his knowledge to help Edel fulfill this wish. Unfortunately, this wish could not be fulfilled due to the limitation of technology and ability. When Edel visited the Institute of Atomic Physics and listened to Pokesba's report, he already had an idea. After Edel walked out of the Institute of Atomic Physics, he called the captain of the guard. Send a message to the Zionist Congress and say I want to meet them. No way. The current Romanian nuclear research progress is too slow. Edel wants to speed up the progress. Simply relying on Romania's own scientific strength is not enough and must seek foreign aid, and the best foreign aid at present is the Zionist Congress. Since the failure of the Jewish uprising in AD 135, the Jews have been expelled from Jerusalem and the whole of Palestine, and have been exiled all over the world. Thousands of years of wandering have caused the Jewish community to suffer many injustices. This also has a lot to do with the culture and religion of the time. In the 16th century, Don Joseph Nassi had already attempted to restore the Jewish state with the help of the Ottoman Empire. After the wave of anti-Semitism appeared in Russia, France, and Germany in the 1880s and 1890s, the Zionist thought and movement formed. In 1882, the Russian Odessa Jewish Dr. L. Pinskal put forward, "People discriminate against Jews because we are not a state, and the only solution to this problem is to establish a Jewish state." At the same time, the Zionist organization Belau appeared in Russia and began the organized immigration of Jews to Palestine. A key event in launching modern Zionism was the Dreyfus incident in France in 1894. Jews were deeply shaken by this incident of anti-Semitism in a country they believed to be the birthplace of freedom and enlightenment. A witness to this event was Jewish Austrian Theodor Herzl. In a pamphlet he published in 1896 called The Jewish State, he described this event as a turning point. Before Dreyfus, Herzl had been an anti-Zionist. He later became an ardent follower of Zionism. In 1897, Herzl convened the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. The Congress established the World Zionist Organization, WZO, and elected Herzl as its first president. The World Zionist Program adopted by the General Assembly stipulates that the goal of Zionism is to establish a Jewish home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which is guaranteed by public law. Zionists believe that Jews in the diaspora and speaking different languages belong to the same ethnic group and should not be integrated and assimilated with other ethnic groups. The main way to solve the Jewish problem is not to eliminate the class roots of anti-Semitism, but to separate from the non-Jews and create a separate state. This can be achieved without the consent of the colonists, Palestinians, with the support of the suzerain and other great powers and the financial aid of wealthy Jews, and by continual immigration to a certain area. In fact, however, the reason why the Jews occupied Palestine was that the ancestors of the Jews lived in Palestine. But this is not the reason why Jews own Palestine, because when a nation owns a piece of land for more than 50 years, it owns it. The Arabs have lived in Palestine for thousands of years, and the main body of the Jews has left Palestine, and they are no longer the main ethnic group in Palestine. At the end of the 19th century, Jews began to immigrate to the Palestine area, which at this time was under the jurisdiction of the Ottoman Empire. The First World War ended in 1918, the Ottoman Empire disintegrated, and the British took control of the area. With the permission of the British government, Jewish immigration to the region accelerated, at this time mainly from Eastern Europe, especially the Soviet Union. At that time, there were more than 1.2 million Arabs in Palestine, accounting for more than 2/3 of the total population. However, the territory of the Arab states in the partition resolution only accounts for 43% of the total area of Palestine. What is even more intolerable for the Arabs is that the territory of the Arab state is fragmented and disconnected, mostly hilly and barren. This is not the case with the Jewish state. Although there are only 600,000 Jews, less than 1/3 of the total population, its territory accounts for 57% of the total area of Palestine. So, Arabs have the right to oppose the resolution, because it is inherently unfair. That's why Romania doesn't support Jews. Not Edel's sympathy, but Romania has a strong idea for the Middle East, and the Arabs who occupy the absolute number must not be offended. Therefore, Romania has not expressed an opinion at all about matters in the region. But now, Seeing that nuclear research has not been able to break through, Edel decided that he must push it. Then there is no better choice than the National Reconstruction Congress, which has enough prestige in the Jewish people, who made the proportion of Jews so large in the scientific world. Edel can only get over the difficulties first. Edel's request was soon passed on to the Zionist Council through various channels, and for the news that Edel wants to contact him, the council that leads his organization attaches great importance to it, because only the British government has given limited support, and although the United Kingdom has agreed to the settlement of Jews in Palestine, it only gives 10,000 places each year. It needs to be explained here that, although the British government supports Jews to settle and live in Palestine, in order to appease the emotions of local Arabs, there are many restrictions on Jews who settle in the area. Although Jews have money, money can't buy everything. The current world economic downturn has caused great headaches for governments of all countries. In order to avoid the intensification of public dissatisfaction with the government, all countries have consciously channeled their dissatisfaction to the Jews, lead to the prevalence of anti-Semitism in Europe and the United States. In various countries, and in Europe alone, attacks on Jews are more than double what they were in the 1920s. Most of the victims were ordinary Jews, so don't look at the Jews who seem to have a good life in the hereafter. But at the moment, the Jews can only try their best to protect themselves. Therefore, the Jewish Council attaches great importance to the invitation of King Edel of Romania. Without letting Edel wait, an important member of the organization boarded the ship bound for Romania. Chapter 630, Cooperation with the Jews, Part 2. Busy Constanța is still the largest port in Romania. Millions of tons of cargo are shipped worldwide through the port every year. Of course, as the largest commercial port in Romania, this is also the first stop in Romania that many people choose. David Ben-Gurion looked at the various ships docked at the port and said to the entourage who looked envious, "Don't worry, our country will not be inferior in the future." Ben-Gurion was born in Poland, formerly known as Gaglin, an ardent Zionist in his youth. He came to Palestine in 1906, first as a journalist. He switched to the Jewish name Ben-Gurion at the beginning of his political career. In 1915 he met his wife Paula Ben-Gurion from Russia in New York, USA. They married in 1917, and they had 3 children together. In 1918 they returned to Palestine, and in 1921 he organized the Israel General Trade Union. In 1930 he founded the Israeli Labour Party. And this time his task is to contact Edel to see if he can get Romania's support. And by the way, he also has a taste of Romania's strength. The Romanian personnel responsible for receiving them also quickly came to them. Hello, Mr. Ben-Gurion, I'm Mona, and I'm in charge of receiving you this time. An official who greeted them introduced himself. Hello, Mr. Monal, I will follow your arrangement from now on. Facing the Romanian reception staff, Ben-Gurion also responded politely. However, judging from the speech and behavior of these few, they should not be government officials. So in his heart, Ben-Gurion was a little uneasy about whether he could reach a favorable agreement with Romania. That's right, this reception was handled by the royal servants, because Edel does not want to make this reception known to everyone. If it's easy to talk about, it's embarrassing if it doesn't work. As for Ben-Gurion, he has long been used to this, because he has seen even more unaccustomed people, which is why he desperately wants the Jews to have their own country. After picking up Ben-Gurion and his party at the port of Constanța, they drove to Bucharest by car. Although the Romanians who were responsible for receiving them along the way were all polite, but no matter what Ben-Gurion said, they could not get useful information. Just kidding, they are all servants. If Ben-Gurion's pediatrics are used to it, that's called humiliation. After a series of checks, Ben-Gurion finally met Edel. Hello, Mr. Ben-Gurion. As soon as I met Edel, I greeted him in a friendly way. Hello, Your Majesty the King. Compared to Edel, Ben-Gurion was much more restrained. However, Edel turned a blind eye to this, and directly stated the intention of his invitation this time. Mr. Ben-Gurion, my meeting with your excellency this time is mainly to help the Jews in the Palestinian area. I understand that the current relationship between the Jews in the area and the local Arabs is poor, and conflicts also occur from time to time. This makes I'm very distressed, so I plan to sell a batch of weapons to you to ensure the safety of the Jews. Edel said that he would send weapons to the Jews in Palestine against the Arabs, and of course Ben-Gurion was willing to do so. However, he also knew that there is no free lunch in the world. Since His Majesty Edel is so generous, he must have requirements for it. Thank you for your Majesty's concern for the Jewish people. We are very grateful for Romania's selfless help to the Jewish community. I don't know how we can help your Majesty. Seeing that Ben-Gurion was so on the road, Edel also expressed his request. That's right, I'm very interested in Professor Einstein's theory of relativity, but the Romanian University has invited him to give lectures in Romania many times, but it may be that Professor Einstein is too busy and has been unable to make the trip. So I hope to meet in person to Professor Einstein. I believe this is also the hope of the Romanian scientific community. Of course, it is best for him to come to Romania to promote his theory. For this, we can also give some help in other aspects. As for Edel's words, Ben-Gurion certainly knew his intention to keep Einstein in Romania. But at present, Einstein is a trump card for the Jews. If you don't ask clearly, how could he possibly agree? Then, Your Majesty, I don't know what kind of help you are talking about. Knowing you were going to ask this, Edel immediately said the help she could give, including diplomatic, military, and economic assistance to Palestinian Jews. Of course, if the results are satisfactory, then Romania can become a refuge for Jews to ensure that your compatriots are not persecuted. The answer given by Edel made Ben-Gurion a little moved, because the current life of the Jews in Europe was difficult. As Hitler came to power, Germany's intention to hostile to the Jews became more and more obvious. In addition to Germany, other European countries also have a large number of hostile behaviors against Jews. At present, there are not many ways for the Jews to deal with it. At most, they are transferred to the United States, which has the least hostile behavior, but it is not as easy as it is said to be transferred, and what should be done with the assets. And many ordinary Jews do not have much savings at all. Like ordinary people of other ethnic groups, they all need to work to support their families, and the United States is not a paradise. Although the Jewish power in the United States is not bad, the Anglo-Saxons who control the American regime will not have much goodwill towards the Jews. In addition to the British, Germans are the largest ethnic group in the United States. As for the Jews, they play more of a housekeeper or accountant role in American society. Therefore, although American Jews are relatively rich, they cannot give much help in supporting the establishment of the Palestinian state. Unless the United States gets out of isolationism and needs to use the Jews, then the American Jews will be able to get some benefits for them. Then this is also the reason why Edel's condition made Ben-Gurion tempted. At present, if the Jewish people want to restore their state in Palestine, they must get the support of major European countries. Although the most important thing is the United Kingdom, they cannot give up on other countries. If nothing else, the mere provision of weapons for the Arabs can make the Jews extremely uncomfortable. Because compared with the Arabs, the Jewish population disadvantage is simply impossible to compare. So Ben-Gurion felt that it was a big deal, and that it had to be discussed. Your Majesty, this matter needs to be discussed by our council, and we cannot give a direct answer now. It's okay, I can wait for your news. Sure enough, when Ben-Gurion returned to his residence and told the rest of the people what Edel had said, the audience cheered. Ben-Gurion also informed the rest of the council of Edel's request, and after a series of discussions, the Jewish council decided to agree to Edel's request. As for doing Einstein's work, it wasn't at all difficult for the Jewish council. So after a bit of haggling, an agreement was reached on Romania and the Jews. Romania will provide Palestine Jews with weapons worth $10 million, and the Romanian Military Academy will provide 40 places for Jews each year. The Zionist organization will pay $20 million for this purpose. In addition, Romania will ensure that there will be no persecution of Jews, and will also accept Jewish refugees, and the Zionist organization will provide $100 per person for services such as food and shelter, provided by Romania. In addition to letting Einstein come to Romania to teach and do research. The Zion organization will also mobilize other Jewish scientists to serve Romania. In addition, when the Jewish state was established, Romania would recognize it as soon as possible. The signing of this agreement provides a refuge for Jews in the future. When Germany began to persecute Jews, a large number of Jews came to Romania through various channels. Not only did they help Romania improve its technological and industrial capabilities, but they also improved Romania in artistic and other ways. Of course, Edel didn't know that the deal didn't just bring Einstein to Romania. In addition, Jewish scientists such as Edward Taylor also came to Romania under the persuasion of the Zion organization, and made great achievements in Romanian nuclear research. Chapter 631. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. In Spain in southern Europe, the smoke over it is getting thicker and thicker. At the beginning of the century, Spain was an economically poor, politically backward agricultural country. The Spanish political system is still biased towards feudal autocracy, and government officials and military generals are mostly senior Catholic monks or aristocratic landlords and other upper-level figures. The semi-feudal system of haciendas prevailed in the countryside, with big landlords in charge of the vast majority of land and resources in the country, and the people of the lower classes lived in hardship. With the consent of King Alfonso XIII, Miguel Primo de Rivera launched a coup d'état on September 13, 1923, and established a 7-year dictatorship to vigorously suppress domestic turmoil. But in 1931, the Spanish Revolution broke out. The de Rivera regime was overthrown. Alfonso XIII went into exile, and Necito Alcalá Zamora established the Second Spanish Republic. But the Second Spanish Republic was also in a turbulent situation, with at least 28 governments established successively. The earliest government was the left-wing Socialist Alliance led by Zamora, which implemented a series of democratic and land reforms, and implemented a series of measures such as disarmament and the closure of military schools. But these reforms were not very effective, and landowners and royal officers still made up the majority of the Spanish parliament and government army. The same is true of land reform. When most of the land was taken into the state, or purchased at a high price, the poor peasants were allocated only a small portion of the royal land. Catholics are also opposed to the Republican government, attacking each other, and the constitution stipulates the separation of church and state. However, the government took advantage of the establishment of the Second Republic to organize an anti-Catholic government, forcefully interfering with the Catholic Church, prohibiting the mission of religious groups, restricting property rights and investments, and banning the Society of Jesus, even allowing anti-Catholic activists to attack monasteries and believers. The Catholic Church also spread anti-Republican and government ideology to believers. The welfare system for the working class is also not enforced. Most capitalists do not comply with regulations such as the 8-hour workday, and the requirements of the autonomous region are only allowed by Catalonia. In August 1932, General José Santujo attempted a coup, but was arrested. Internal fighting and the Great Depression of the 1930s made the domestic society unstable, and communism spread rapidly in Spain. The country is full of political forces of various ideologies. The left and the right are in conflict with each other, and they joined forces with other activists to expand their power among them. The ******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Party have the most violent methods. There have been many violent incidents in their country, and they have also intensified the camp confrontation in the Civil War, which has led to the escalation of the scale of the conflict. In October 1935, the Spanish left-wing bloc was formed by the Spanish Communist Party, PCE, the Marxist Workers' Party, PAM, the Union of Workers, UGT, the Basques, Catalans and anarchists. The political propositions of the Popular Front before the election include pardoning political prisoners arrested and imprisoned by the right-wing government, providing basic salaries for farm workers, and restricting working hours, restoring the constitution and the establishment of autonomous regions, democratizing public institutions and the military, banning the Communist Party and the Royalist. It was widely supported by the workers, peasants and petty bourgeoisie, and won the election in 1936, and regained the ruling power. José Santujo founded an organization called the Spanish Military Alliance, which planned to overthrow the Republican government by force, implement a right-wing dictatorship, and restore domestic order. Supporters are divided into three factions: the conservative soldiers representing the interests of the kulaks, the liberals representing the interests of the middle class, and the phalangists representing the interests of small farmers and handicraftsmen. There were not many active officers in this organization, but many retired officers. Sanjuho himself was still living in Portugal at the time, and he was commanded by Emilio Moura, an active army brigadier general in the country. At the same time, the royalists also opposed the reform of the republic. The leader of the royalists was Antonio Garisha, who in 1937 had claimed to have brought down the republic through a military coup or civil war, and had traveled to the Kingdom of Italy to gain Mussolini's support. The leader of the orthodox faction was Fergent, who also prepared to overthrow the Republican government by force, and trained militias in the Navarre Mountains. In 1933, Spain held elections again, and the right-wing radical Republicans won and returned to power with Alejandro Lerrouz as president. Lerrouz undoes various reforms of the previous government, including ending land reform, returning church property, abolishing the constitution and autonomous regions, and releasing many right-wing and royalists. The right-wing government has used armed repression against opponents in the February 1936 elections. Out of a total of 9.25 million votes, the Left Alliance narrowly won by 4.75 million votes, and regained power again. It won 267 seats in Congress, and 132 for the right-wing coalition. It is governed by Manu Lasagna as president and Cassilis Jaroka as prime minister. The left-wing government once again changed the various policies of the right wing, which aroused the dissatisfaction of many nationalist, royalist and other forces, and attempted to overthrow the Republican government. Franco's friend, Joaquin Herreras, once described Lasagna as a repulsive caterpillar of red Spain, and was particularly disliked by Spanish officers, especially when he served as a warfighter in 1931. During the ministerial period, many military expenditures were cut, and military schools were closed. In these stormy days, both the left and the right have adopted eye-popping struggle methods such as gunfights, assassinations, and kidnappings. In 4 months, 260 political murders took place in Spain. The headquarters of 70 large and small parties and political groups were destroyed, and 10 newspapers were destroyed. Important political figures were not spared either. In 1936, Asua, director of the Constitutional Drafting Committee, and former minister, Dr. Martinez, a Democratic liberal, were all assassinated. Among them, Sotero's death became the fuse that detonated both parties. On July 13, members of the government's assault guards broke into the home of conservative leader, MP, and former Rivera government finance minister Jose Calvo Sodró, and kidnapped him. In the police pickup truck, assault guard Captain Fernando Cuncas was shot twice into Sodró's head. They then dumped the blood-stained body of the MP in the Madrid public cemetery. When conservatives staged a massive funeral and demonstrations for him, Republican police opened fire on the crowd, killing 2 more on the spot. Sodró's death has shocked Spain and the whole of Europe. At the same time, it also made other members of the right feel angry, so the famous "It's Sunny All Over Spain Today" telegram also caused the Spanish Civil War to break out. The Spanish Foreign Legion and Moorish Legion took advantage of military exercises in Spanish Morocco to break out a rebellion. Pro-right officers of the Spanish Military Union rallied against the Republic and elected Sanjurjo, exiled in Portugal, as their leader. At the same time, the alliance issued a declaration to all Spanish provinces in Morocco: all officers participating in the movement will receive promotions and lifetime pensions, and called for the purge of unreliable officers and soldiers in the army. On the afternoon of the 17th, the Foreign Legion in Ceuta and Melilla, Morocco, publicly launched a rebellion in various cities in Spanish Morocco, with a total of about 35,000 rebels. The rebel forces imprisoned General Gomez, the commander-in-chief, and executed General Manuel Mosreles, who refused to cooperate. On this day, General Franco, the military governor of the Canary Islands, also instigated a rebellion with his own troops. He issued this call: the army has decided to restore order in Spain. General Franco is in place to lead the movement. He appeals to the sentiments of all Spaniards who are willing to work for the restoration of Spain. Franco then flew to Tétouan, Morocco, to command the rebel forces. Other troops stationed in Morocco also took part in the rebellion, as Franco was highly regarded among the most elite Spanish Africans. The insurgent forces were at a loss, occupying Melilla and Ceuta successively, and controlling the entire territory of Spanish Morocco. On the morning of the 19th, escorted by a cruiser, the rebel troop convoy crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and anchored in front of the Algeciras fortress. After a burst of artillery bombardment, the fortress surrendered. Moorish soldiers of the rebel army then landed and occupied the city. Faced with a move by the army to stand up against the government, 80% of the regular army, 120,000 soldiers, turned against it. The Madrid government called on workers to fight in the defense of the republic. More than 200,000 workers responded to the call, flocking to Madrid from all over the country. Meanwhile, in other parts of the country, the fighting between the army and the workers is also unfolding. Despite the lack of training, the workers' armed forces were extremely heroic in combat. Unable to distribute regular weapons, many of them took part in the battle to defend the republic with shotguns, knives, forks, grenades or explosive packs. In some places the rebellion was suppressed, while in others it was controlled by the National Army. By July 20th, when the first round of the contest between the two sides was basically over, the National Army controlled almost all of Morocco, the Canary Islands, the entire Balearic Islands except Minorca, the Guadarrama Mountains and the Ebro. A large area north of the river. The government of the Republic occupied the east coast, the Basque Country, Catalonia and other places, and cut off the connection between the north and south of the National Army and the province of Badajoz. Meanwhile, Spain's largest cities, Madrid and Barcelona, remain in the hands of the Republic. Some areas are in a stalemate. In Asturias, the government-controlled area is intertwined with the National Army-controlled area. When both sides find that the war may continue, looking for foreign aid becomes a common choice for both sides. Chapter 632. Aid from Romania. Before the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, the generals of the National Army had contact with the German and Italian ambassadors, and we also have reason to believe that, if it were not for the secret support of the two countries, the Spanish military could not have launched a civil war. And the outbreak of the Civil War after that, the National Army immediately received military assistance from Germany and Italy. In the first few days, German and Italian planes moved more than 14,000 soldiers and large quantities of military supplies from Morocco to the peninsula. And after our estimation, if it weren't for the early help of Germany and Italy, the National Army would probably have failed under the suppression of the Madrid government. Because the Spanish Navy is still in the hands of the government. In the conference room, Intelligence Chief Hull Monkman personally introduced to all the senior military and political officials present the role of Germany and Italy in the Spanish Civil War. Of course, there is a reason for Romania to spend so much energy studying the situation in Spain. The National Army asked Romania for help. This may be because the National Army felt that Romania, as the front line of the anti-Soviet Union, must be very interested in fighting communism. Although the National Army has received strong support from Germany and Italy, who would think that there is little support? In line with the idea of strengthening one point, it is very understandable for Spain to ask Romania for help. In the face of Spain's request for help, both the military and the government are very interested. Not to mention Spain's rich resources, its geographical location is worthy of Romania's efforts. So after Hull Monkman finished speaking, looking at the senior military and political officials who were eager to try, Edel knew that Romania would definitely participate in this Spanish Civil War, so he pointed to Friet's name and asked, "Admiral Friet, what is the attitude of your military?" Facing Edel's question, Friet, who had already made up his mind, said, "Your Majesty, our military believes that Spain's preparation for war is our opportunity. In the face of the obviously left-leaning Spanish government, the Spanish military forces headed by General Sanjurjo are obviously more able to become our allies. Therefore, this is not conducive to the expansion of our Romanian government. In terms of influence in the Mediterranean and Southern Europe, this is a great opportunity. I think we should support the forces of the National Army in this civil war, the decision that the military has made." Edel asked the government again. "And what about the government's opinion?" Prime Minister Mahalakat, the head of government, also voted in favor. We believe that it is possible to secretly support Spain, which will not only increase our country's influence, but also benefit economically. Obviously, His Excellency the Prime Minister has the intention of taking advantage of the fire point, since both parties have no opinion, so the debate about which side Romania supports is over. In fact, the aid to the rebel forces goes far beyond Germany and Italy. British firms supply the National Army with oil and planes. Franco gets arms and ammunition from the British military base in Gibraltar, and the French Renault company secretly sells planes and planes to the National Army. More than 75% of the oil needed by the National Army is supplied by American oil companies. Now that it has been decided to give support to the National Army, the issue of aid cannot but be mentioned, and Edel continued to ask, "How is your military going to help the National Army?" It was obvious that Friet, who had been prepared, spoke up. "Your Majesty, we intend to provide Spain with the weapons and equipment they need most. It mainly consists of rifles, artillery, tanks, aircraft and other equipment. In order to help the training of the National Army, we intend to send a military advisory group to help it improve its combat level. In addition, the Navy will also send a task force headed by the Mercia-class battleship and the heavy cruiser US Brebisa to ensure the safety of navigation in the region." It is obvious that Ferret's words came after internal discussions among the three armies. Otherwise, why would Ferret make decisions for the Navy? Now that the military has decided to secretly send a military advisory group, Edel is a little curious about the candidate for the head of the advisory group this time. Who are you planning to lead this time? After our discussion, Lieutenant General Hoffman is the best choice for this team leader. Edel was a little alarmed by Ferret's words, because the selection of the head of the advisory group was very important, which did not mean the importance of the support and the size of the scale. Then how large are you planning to send the advisory group this time? Sure enough, with Edel's inquiry, Ferret gave the answer. "We will send an advisory group composed of more than 8,000 people, mainly the Air Force, Air Defense Force, and Mechanized Force." Obviously, such a large-scale advisory group is not just advisors. It is obvious that the military intends to participate in this civil war shirtless. In fact, the size of the Romanian advisory group has surpassed that of the German Condor Legion. The number of the world-famous Condor Legion in the Spanish Civil War has never exceeded 7,000. It's just that Germany has a very high replacement rate, because it has to test the performance of equipment and train troops. Throughout the Spanish War, the replacement rate of the Condor Legion reached 50,000 people. In fact, the help of the Condor Legion to the National Army is far less important than that from Italy. In order to help the National Army, in early 1937, Italy dispatched an intervention force composed of black shirts, military experts, and regular troops. The number of more than 50,000 people was organized into 4 divisions to help the National Army fight. This also has a lot to do with Spain's position, because Spain and Italy are on the left and right of France. Much like the German environment before World War I, its land and sea can be threatened by both sides, which is also the experience that Italy has learned from the Franco-Russian alliance in World War I. Moreover, Spain's domestic tungsten, mercury, iron ore and agricultural products are urgently needed by Italy. At present, half of the demand for iron ore in the Italian steel industry's raw materials comes from Spain. Therefore, helping Spain is very important to Italy, and in order to bring the National Army he supported to power, Mussolini naturally wanted to ensure that it seized power in Spain. After Romania decided to intervene in the Spanish Civil War, it immediately held secret discussions with the National Army. During this period, however, the plane crash of General José Santujo had some impact on the negotiations. As a leader after the outbreak of the Civil War, he was in Lisbon to join the National Army, but the plane he took was overloaded. The original reason was that he and his entourage insisted on bringing into Madrid with the general's dress, causing it to crash onto Kiev. There are also rumors that he, like Emilio Mora, the second figure in the National Army, was assassinated by Franco to prevent his political opponents, but there is no relevant evidence. During this period of time, the chaos of the National Army also affected the negotiations. But fortunately, Franco, who initially took control of the National Army, attached great importance to Romania's assistance, and the subsequent negotiations proceeded very quickly. In the end, Spain obtained weapons and equipment worth 150 million lei from Romania on the basis of future customs taxes. At the same time, the Romanian Advisory Group, led by General Hoffmann, also set off for Spain. Chapter 633, Air Encounter. The sky is clear and there are no clouds. This is a good weather for flying. The engine was rumbling, sitting in the open cockpit, wearing a flight jacket and a flight cap, and Filkus, who was fully armed, was looking forward to it. As one of only 3 squadron captains currently in the RF-20, Filkus has plenty of reason to be proud. My own. It can be said that the RF-20 Peregrine Falcon is the latest Romanian fighter jet, which is quite different from the Albatros fighter jets I have driven in the past. First of all, in terms of speed, the speed of 440 km per hour of the Albatros fighter and the speed of 596 km per hour of the Peregrine RF-20 fighter is not the same level. Of course, except the Peregrine RF-20 fighter is equipped with an enviable 1200 horsepower 12-cylinder liquid-cooled V-type engine. This engine is the latest work by the National Power Laboratory, with a net weight of 610 kilograms, a total length of 1352 millimeters, a total width of 705 millimeters, and a total height of 1027 millimeters. Maximum takeoff output power 1200 HP, rated power 110 HP/4500 meters, 8 minutes. Maximum continuous power 1060 HP/5000 meters, 30 minutes. Maximum cruising power 940 HP/5700 meters. Maximum economic cruise power 900 HP/5500 meters. It can be said to be an excellent engine that leads the world's similar products. Of course, in addition to the powerful engine of the Peregrine Falcon RF-20 fighter, its excellent aerodynamic structure also provides great help. The Peregrine Falcon RF-20 fighter adopts a semi-spindle nose, which is different from the flat and thick nose of most aircraft now, with good rectification effect and low resistance. The engine is mounted on the fire-resistant bearing wall behind the support frame, behind which is the mid-rear fuselage of semi-monocoque structure. The wing adopts a cantilevered lower wing with an elliptical plane shape, which has good aerodynamic characteristics and a large lift-to-drag ratio. In addition, the cockpit of the aircraft adopts a streamlined integrated cover, which improves the driver's vision and is beneficial to his combat. Of course, as Romania's latest fighter, its firepower is also extremely powerful. In addition to being equipped with 220mm cannons in the belly, 60 rounds per cannon, it is also equipped with 12.7mm large caliber machine guns, 280 rounds each, on the wings. Moreover, the Peregrine Falcon RF-20 has a high demand for the voyage because it faces the threat of the Soviet Union, so sufficient consideration has been given to the research and development of the voyage. Its maximum range is 1,200 kilometers, with an auxiliary fuel tank of 1,500 kilometers. Such a powerful firepower is enough to help Romania establish the status of the modified aircraft in the current world. Therefore, the pilots who fly these new aircraft are the elites of the current Romanian Air Force, and Filkus, the squadron commander, is one of the best among them. In the local war in Luosu, he drove the Albatros fighter and shot down a total of 4 fighters, 1 bomber, and 1 reconnaissance plane. Being a squadron commander is more than enough to know the local war in Luosu at that time. It can be said that there were more wolves than meat. Many people drove the fighter plane for a few laps without seeing a Soviet plane, and he was able to obtain so many victories. Of course, it was a good luck point, and this time, their squadron was transferred to Spain, obviously intending to test the capabilities of the new fighter. An aircraft that has not been tested in the field cannot be a good aircraft. And this time their mission is very simple, that is, to protect the bombers of the National Army from bombing the Madrid government. Although the two sides entered the stage of stalemate, everyone knew that this was just preparation for the next battle. In order to delay the deployment of the Madrid government forces, aerial bombardment is an inevitable choice. And this time, it was to bomb a traffic point outside Madrid. Of course, such a dangerous task would inevitably require the most elite protection. And in the Spanish battlefield, where is there a more elite fighter squadron than Philkus Squadron? With the command of the command tower, Philkus drove the fighter plane and took his 11 subordinates to fly off the runway. Next, they need to meet the bomber group they need to protect point. After arriving at the designated assembly airspace, a large group of bombers were slowly flying towards here. Of course, this slowness is the result seen in Philkus' eyes, but in fact, this group of bombers composed of British Rail 20 is not slow at all. Its maximum flight speed reaches 440 km per hour, which is comparable to the speed of many fighter jets today. Of course, this is when the weight is empty, and a fully loaded British Rail 20 naturally cannot reach this speed point, and this is a new Italian bomber that has only been characterized this year. From this, it can be seen that the Italian government has done its best to support Franco's National Army point. After meeting with the bomber group, Philkus took his subordinates to drive 12 RF-20 Peregrine fighter jets to protect the bomber group, and flew towards the target point. The small town of Flexi, 20 kilometers west of Madrid, is a point of connection to the Barcelona railway. A large number of trains carrying various materials supplemented the Madrid front line with materials and troops by railway to resist the possible attack of the National Army. Because Madrid is too important, the government cannot afford to lose the capital. Point today is a little different. The soldiers and civilians in the town heard a humming sound from far to near. Look, an enemy plane is coming. Point. A sharp-eyed government soldier said aloud what he saw. Point. Quick, prepare for air defense. Call the rear. We were hit by a large-scale air attack, and the number of enemy planes was around 40, most of which were bombers. The officer holding the binoculars saw more details as the high-pitched air defense alarm sounded. The soldiers and civilians on the ground immediately fled, and everyone was trying their best to find cover. At the same time, many people are praying to God to protect themselves from harm. Point. Without giving the town's military and civilians much opportunity to prepare, the bomber group consisting of 24 British Rail 20s immediately rushed up viciously. Point. They sadistically dropped bombs on major targets such as train stations, military camps, and warehouses, and the railway bridge outside the town became their main target. The government forces had few ways to face the bombardment, and a small number of anti-aircraft weapons were lost within 5 minutes of firing. Point. The lack of the cover of anti-aircraft weapons makes the bomber unscrupulous. The town is even more like a hell on earth, and the main targets of the train station, military camp, warehouse, etc., have attracted many people's attention. Point. The railway bridge outside the town was also bombed in turns, and was broken into 2 sections. I'm afraid that it will not be repaired at all in a few months. As for the escort fighters led by Philkus, they hovered boredly at high altitudes, seeing the bombers abusing them below. Point. Boring, so boring. God, old man, please let me see the enemy plane. Point. That's what most of the Philkus squadron thought. Point. Maybe it was because God was too bored with Philkus and couldn't stand it any longer. After a while, Philkus heard the excited voices of his team members on the radio. Point. Squadron commander, an unknown aircraft group, is found on the left. The number of them is around 18. Point. The information from the radio made Philkus instantly cheer up. He looked to his left, and there were nearly 20 small black spots. Philkus hurriedly raised the 8x telescope he had been assigned to look at, and a stubby monoplane appeared in his eyes. This is the latest Soviet I-16 fighter jet. Philkus has seen pictures of this model in the Air Force. This fighter jet was introduced in the Soviet Union in 1935. Point. And Philkus was not afraid of this at all, and immediately issued an order. Deputy Squadron Berkeley, you lead the 3rd team to continue covering, and I lead the 1st and 2nd teams to meet the incoming enemy aircraft. Point. Clear. After getting a response from the deputy squadron commander, Philkus continued to give orders. The 1st and 2nd squads follow me and shoot them down. Point. Suddenly there was a burst of cheers from the radio. Point. Seeing the cheerful voices of the boys, Philkus showed a smile at the corner of his mouth. Point. I saw 8 Peregrine Falcon RF-20 fighter jets in the sky quickly pounced on the intruding enemy aircraft, and the Iraqi 16 fighter jets, which had a numerical advantage, were naturally not afraid and immediately greeted them. Point. As if the cheaters saw their prey, both sides flew towards each other. Now, the 2 sides are flying head to head. Philkus has no fear. He stabilized the plane, stared closely at the sight in front of him, put the plane in front of him firmly in the cross ring, and then pressed the button on the joystick. Point. And now is the time. to show the firepower of both. The .20mm machine guns and .12.7mm large caliber machine guns equipped by the Peregrine Falcon RF-20 fighters immediately fired deadly bullets, while the 47.62mm caliber machine guns of the I-16 were no match at all. The engine was directly stopped on the spot, and a thick smoke came out of it, and the plane fell to the ground at a large angle. After losing control point and the skilled Filcus even had time to find another opponent, I saw that he put another I-16 into the sight and opened fire again. Haha. Another fight. Filcus happily calculated the results after Filcus and his subordinates attacked the enemy. There were no less than 8 RF-20 Peregrine Falcon fighters, but one suffered from traumatic wing damage. The I-16 behind him was missing 7, and one was obviously damaged. Now everyone's numbers are approaching rapidly. The reason for this result, in addition to the difference in the quality of the pilots, is the difference in the firepower and protection of the aircraft. Not to mention the firepower, the power of .20mm machine guns and 12.7mm machine guns is not comparable to 47.62mm caliber machine guns. And in terms of protection, in order to increase the efficiency of the head-to-head attack, the RF-20 fighter also adds armor to the nose. In the face of its new armor equivalent to 14mm protection, the 7.62 caliber machine gun is so powerless. Without further ado, continue to pull up and dive. Height is very important in air combat, and it happens that the climb rate and altitude of RF-20 fighter is unmatched by I-16. In the face of the RF-20 fighter's maximum liftoff limit of 12,000 meters, the E-16 is no match for the 8,270 meter limit. At this time, the anxious voice of Berkeley deputy squadron leader came from the Filcus radio. 16 enemy planes were found on the right side, and it was visually estimated that they were the enemy's Iraqi 15 fighter jets. Hearing the words of his deputy squadron commander, Filcus still didn't understand. I saw him immediately ordered, "Tell the bomber group to immediately stop the bombing and evacuate first. We are responsible for covering point." In fact, without their orders, the commander in charge of the bombing had already dropped all the bombs as soon as possible and immediately turned on the maximum speed to leave. Anyway, their basic purpose has been achieved. Why are they still here waiting for the enemy to catch them? As for Filcus, he started to climb with his subordinates, using his height and speed to get rid of his opponents. Although the Air Force commander of the Spanish government wanted to keep them all, it was impossible to face fighters with higher performance than their own. As for chasing the bomber, the British Rail 20 bomber, which has a speed of up to 440 km per hour, after dropping the bomb, is also beyond its reach. Moreover, there are RF-20 fighter jets in the sky, and they dare not expose the tail of the aircraft to the other side. But I have never heard of fighter jets attaching weapons to the tail of the aircraft. So the first battle Romania participated in ended in such an imperfect way, and although the result was not perfect, it still worked. At least the next time a government Air Force plane faces an RF-20 fighter jet, it's time for a headache. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 634 Spanish Gold 1. When Germany, Italy, and Romania obviously provided a lot of support for the National Army, the Republican government as its opponent naturally needed to find help. Although the Soviet Union gave a batch of aid before, it was basically exhausted in the Civil War. Different from the original time and space, due to the rise of Romania, the external environment of the Soviet Union has become more severe, so it is more eager for the needs of allies. At present, the Spanish Republican government is the only country in Europe that has become the Soviet Union's help. Therefore, although Stalin has long ceased to pursue his own revolution, he is also very urgent for a country that can share its pressure. So after the outbreak of the Civil War, the Soviet Union secretly aided Spain. A week after the outbreak of the Civil War, a shipment of arms worth 40 million rubles was shipped from Leningrad to Valencia, which is still under the control of the Republican government. In addition, the Soviet Union also sent a military advisory group of more than 3,000 people mainly in the Air Force, armor, artillery and other technical officers, in order to strengthen the strength of the Spanish Republican government. However, with the advent of the stalemate stage, the material resources of the three countries of Germany continued to flow into the national army, and the Republican government immediately felt the pressure. For this reason, they could only put their hopes on the Soviet Union. To this end, a heavyweight official of the Republican government went to the Soviet Union in person, intending to ask Comrade Steele for help. Carlos Ibarra, one of the founders of the Spanish Communist Party who was received by Lenin, was the representative who was in charge of requesting aid from the Soviet Union this time. As the helm of the Soviet Union, Stalin was no stranger to Ibarra, the female leader of the Spanish Communist Party, because she attended the 13th enlarged session of the Executive Committee of the Comintern in 1932 and spoke at the meeting. Respected Comrade Stalin, the rebel army has grown sharply with the support of the evil forces of the three countries of Germany and Italy. Although the sons and daughters of the Communist Party in Spain are not afraid of sacrifice, the fire of the revolution is facing the consequences of being extinguished by imperialism. So we hope with the aid of the Soviet Union. Seeing the cry of the Ibarra in front of him, Stalin comforted him. Please rest assured, Comrade Ibarra, the Soviet Union must not allow Spain to be invaded by terrorism and imperialism, and we will send more soldiers loyal to the revolution to help Spain. However, the Soviet Union is currently carrying out economic construction, and the Soviet Union's national strength is still far from the three countries of the Droga, and the assistance it can provide is far from being comparable to it. But as big brother, the Soviet Union will do everything in its power to help you. Of course, if you have other options, you can also try. In fact, before Stalin and Ibarra met, the issue of aid to Spain had been discussed within the Soviet Union. Among them, there are mainly two opinions. One is to increase aid efforts to keep the Spanish Republican government. The other is that Spain can be appropriately aided, but it is still necessary to give priority to guaranteeing the Soviet Union itself. These two attitudes also reflected the hesitancy of the Soviet Union towards Spain. Because after the outbreak of the Civil War, the rebels only supported the three Drogas, and their combined strength was completely higher than that of the Soviet Union. Not to mention the three countries of the United States, Britain and France, which have a partial attitude. These three countries are neutral on the surface, but they are still secretly inclined to the rebels. Otherwise, how could the three kingdoms of Draw have changed to support the rebels in such an upright manner? On the other hand, if the Soviet Union, as the big brother of communism, does not give support to its own Spanish Republican government, it will bring huge damage to the Soviet Union's reputation in the world, and this kind of damage is also unwilling to see the Soviet Union. After all, many working classes now regard the Soviet Union as a second motherland, and it is they who have restrained governments from being hostile to the Soviet Union. After all, for the Soviet Union, which is still in a different state, it must exist in this world, so in addition to its own national strength, it also needs help from other aspects. And the working class of all countries is the best target for the Soviet Union. Therefore, in the face of this situation, the Soviet Union is really not good at expressing its position. The result of the Soviet Union's negotiation was that the aid to Spain must continue, but it was mainly supplemented by personnel and equipment, and Spain needed to buy weapons by itself. Yes, the Soviet Union intends to make up for a wave before the bleeding. Although the Spanish Empire is long gone, there are still 3,000 males in the broken ship, and the Spanish family still has some assets. In particular, the current Republican government controls more than 500 tons of gold in the Spanish treasury, which can at least reduce the expenditure of the Soviet Union. That's why Stalin would say such a sentence when facing Ms. Ibarra. As for Ms. Ibarra, whose political ability is still young at present, she is definitely not Stalin's opponent, and the rhythm of the conversation will soon be completely mastered by Stalin. For the help of the Soviet government, the Spanish people will surely remember this kindness. We can buy weapons and equipment. Hearing Ms. Ibarra's words, Stalin was relieved, because it is best to say this from the mouth of the Spanish Republican government. If the Soviet Union proposes it may be said to be a threat to take the opportunity. Then I will let the people below negotiate with your country and need to buy those equipment. After getting the desired result, Stalin called government officials, to discuss the purchase of weapons with Ms. Ballery. The following talks went well for both parties. Because this time the Soviet Union opened its supply of its ordnance equipment to Spain, as long as the Soviet Union was willing to provide Spain with many new weapons that had just been finalized. This is also the attitude of the Soviet Union. In order to show itself to the world, the Soviet Union has always been generous to its friends. These dazzling array of weapons and equipment dazzled the Republican government, and in the end the Republican government selected guns, artillery and other equipment that could equip 150,000 people. The main reason for this situation is that there are too many recruits in the Republican government. After the military rebellion, the Republican government has been short of enough officers and soldiers. Although the working class joins the army enthusiastically, training these people requires a lot of weaponry and ammunition. In addition, the Republican government has also purchased a lot of aircraft and anti-aircraft weapons for the Drogue Air Force, which is abusing the Spanish people. Of course, in addition to these, there are also military supplies such as raincoats, tents, telephone lines, rain boots, etc. These equipments are fully loaded on more than 10 ships. In the face of the urgent domestic demand in Spain, Stalin decided to release these materials first, and then wait for the gold to be shipped out. Facing Stalin's sympathy for the Republican government, Ms. Ballery and the Republican government were grateful. So after a successful result, the Spanish Republican government began to prepare for the future transport of gold. Chapter 635 Spanish Gold 2. All transactions between the Soviet Union and the Republican government were carried out in secret, especially the transfer of Spanish gold to the Soviet Union, which was extremely secret. But there are exceptions to everything, and the difference in history is that the rise of Romania has made it all full of variables. You say Spain intends to ship gold to the Soviet Union. In the palace, Edel looked at Hohenzollern, who was reporting to him in front of him, and asked in surprise. There is no way that this news surprised Edel too much. This is just as mindless as Ukraine's placing its own family in the United States and later generations, and more importantly, Edel didn't know that. After coming to this world for many years, Edel's memory of the past life is not much left. Basically only the general direction is left, and the small details are forgotten. Moreover, as a keyboard warrior in his previous life, his focus on foreign countries was on Germany, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Except for the outbreak of the Civil War and the victory of Franco, Spain basically disappeared. But Hohenzollern, who didn't know that His Majesty's mind had long since drifted away, replied affirmatively. Yes, Your Majesty, I have confirmed the news from the insider of the Republican government. At this time, Hohenzollern sighed very much at His Majesty's foresight. Beginning in 1932, His Majesty hinted that he would increase his intelligence work in Spain, and a spy arranged by himself happened to be absorbed by the Spanish Communist Party. Now I actually gave myself such a great gift. He knew very well that the former Milik and the former captain of the guard, Karist, joined forces to get the Russian gold back. Although the matter is being kept under strict secrecy, all those involved have been rewarded. After this incident, the predecessor Milik became the first person in the legend of Romanian intelligence again. For Hohenzollern, this information about Spanish gold can even make His Majesty see his abilities. Of course, he needs to perform well in the next work. And Edel is considering such a response to the news. According to intelligence information, the Spanish government controls more than 500 tons of gold, as well as some other valuable bonds. Of course, it is impossible for these Republican governments to take the marketable bonds to the Soviet Union, mainly the more than 500 tons of gold. This wealth is too attractive, especially when Romania is short of money. This news is especially precious. Of course, the transportation route must be figured out at the first time, which is very important for Romania. Thinking of this, Edel immediately gave orders to Hohenzollern. Hohenzollern, your intelligence department needs to figure out the transportation route. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, I will send the most elite intelligence officers to figure out the transportation route this time. Then, Edel called a guard Immediately call the Chief of General Staff of Farit, Admiral Lomerton, and Lieutenant Admiral Anchorage, and say that I have something urgent to recruit them. Yes, Your Majesty. The bodyguard who led Edel's order immediately ran away. Following Edel's order, the Romanian military and intelligence services immediately launched an investigation. At the same time, Lieutenant General Hoffman, who was far away in Spain, and Rear Admiral Midrafiel, who led the task force, were also notified to let them pay attention to the movements of the Republican government. Gerinago is the head of the Transport Division of the Ministry of Transport of the Spanish Republic. Although this position is not high, it is a lowly position. Because it holds the information of railway and road shipping, it has access to a lot of information that others cannot. Director, Mr. Minister asked you to go. A subordinate spoke to Gerinago, who was working hard, and said the minister's request. Okay, now, I'll go right away. After putting down his work, Gerinago immediately walked to the minister's office. Gerinago came to Minister Jared's office and asked his boss, Minister, are you looking for me? Yes, Yelena. You come here, and I have something I need you to do. Harold, who had recovered from his busy state, drew Yerinage to his side before speaking with a serious expression. Yelena, you are also an old party member. I still attach great importance to your ability and loyalty to the party, and now there is a very important thing that needs to be done by you. Hearing the minister's words, Gerinago immediately stood up and replied with a focused expression. Please rest assured that I will not live up to the expectations of the organization, and I will definitely complete the tasks given to me by the organization. Very good. Minister Jared was satisfied with Gerinago's answer. This task is of great importance to the Republican government. At present, there are no more than 10 people who know the details, and Heller is also carefully selected by him. In terms of ability, he is also the best group in his own Ministry of Communications, and more importantly, Yerinage is still a party member, and his loyalty to the organization has been tested many times. So Minister Heller went on to say, you are also the one I carefully selected, but this task is very important. You need to pay more attention. The rest of the work will be left to others for the time being. You just need to concentrate on this task. In the face of Minister Herrer's words so serious, Gerinago felt curious for a while. Although he really wanted to ask what tasks he needed to do this time, he believed that the minister would inform him next. Sure enough, Minister Harold said to him next, we have a shipment of valuables that needs to be secretly shipped from Madrid to Valencia, and you are in charge of coordinating the domestic transportation route, and you must ensure that this shipment is not damaged in any way. Hearing the mission from Minister Hara, Gerinago answered without hesitation. Please rest assured, Minister, I will prepare now and make sure that no one will know about this transportation. Jared looked at Gerinago with satisfaction and waved. Go, remember not to walk around during this time. In addition, to ensure your safety during this time, you will be protected by guards. Jared's words had no effect on Gerinago, who replied as if he were a proletarian fighter. Thanks to the organization for believing in me, and I will not let the organization down. At the time of Gerinago's mission, the aid provided by the Soviet Union to the Republican government finally arrived at the Republican government controlled port. In the ports of Valencia and Barcelona, Soviet sailors on ships such as the Komsomolskaya, Neva, Cuban, and the Turks West Railway risked their lives to pass through the blockades of other countries and finally dock a ship full of supplies to shore. The long-awaited stevedores immediately unloaded the supplies that the Republican government was in desperate need of from the ship and transported them to the front line by train. In addition to this batch of supplies, there are nearly 2,000 members of the military advisory group from the Soviet Union on board. They came with anger at the Soviets' intervention in the civil war of the Three Kingdoms of Drugi. In this advisory group, there are dozens of members who also have a task, which is to help Spain transport that batch of gold to the Soviet Union. Now the industrial development of the Soviet Union has made it extremely eager for this batch of gold. Chapter 636 Spanish Gold 3. Spain, Madrid, train station. The entire railway station has been under martial law. The soldiers guarding the railway station with live ammunition are soldiers from the International Column, sent by the Soviet Union. At this time, their expressions are a little nervous, watching the cars drive over quick. They shouted loudly, the car stopped on the platform, and the soldiers sent by the government army were loading the wooden crates on the car onto the train. This group of soldiers is a little strange, because the general handling work is done by workers. To be able to use them as porters, it seems that these boxes are quite important. Speaking of which, these boxes are not big, but they are quite heavy. What are they? Although the soldiers are quite curious, they still know the rules of the army. It's not up to them, they are just here to work. It can be seen from this that the Spanish government attaches great importance to this transportation. It does not allow ordinary people to take over any work. The whole process is in the hands of the military, and except for a few officers who know a small part of the situation, ordinary soldiers, even I don't know what's in the box in my hand. Hey. A soldier suddenly slanted his foot, and the wooden box on his shoulder fell heavily, and one corner fell to the stone floor of the platform. Crash. The lid of the box opened, and the goods inside were scattered like this. In an instant, all the soldiers who were carrying them stopped. Under the sunlight, it was golden, and inside, there were actually gold bars. If you can have such a root, you will be rich in this life. Bang. At this moment, a crisp gunshot came. A responsible officer took out his pistol and fired a shot into the sky. This shot was a warning. Keep working, don't stop. The Soviet officer's face was quite stern, and the meaning of his silent warning was extremely obvious. Anyone who had a crooked mind would die. The soldier who had just dropped the box immediately bent down and hurriedly put all the gold back into the box. In the distance, a two-story building. A telescope that had been set up for a long time was placed behind the window and covered by a curtain. Now, the man behind the telescope, taking his eyes away from the telescope, he said to the other person, notify immediately, follow this train, and determine its destination. His appearance was unremarkable, and he was only about 1.7 meters tall. He could not be found in the crowd, but he is one of the leaders of this reconnaissance mission, one of the best players of the Romanian intelligence service. Barrackly. He was born in Edel, Transylvania. As a boy, he was dissatisfied with his family living in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When Romania was at war with Austria-Hungary, Edel personally led the way. When Transylvania returned to Romania, Edel signed up for the army. However, during the selection process, his sharp mind and calm personality were valued by the intelligence services, and he joined the Romanian intelligence services. In the past few years in the intelligence department, he has won many credits, and he is already a competent person in the Romanian intelligence department. So he was sent to Spain by Hallmann to ensure that this operation was flawless. After loading all the wooden boxes on the train, everyone immediately stood in the distance, because the train had its own guards. There are a total of 10 carriages, each of which is guarded by more than a dozen soldiers in uniforms of international columns. The guns they held in their hands were quite special. The wooden butt and the magazine in the front had turned into a round cake-like thing. There were many cooling holes on the barrel in the front. Their eyes are quite sharp, and at first glance they are elites in 100 battle Soviet interior guards. They are now in Madrid in the uniforms of the international column, and have no interest at all in joining the battle here. They have only one mission, to secure the safe transfer of this cargo to the ship. Woo. The front of the steam locomotive blew its whistle, and in the sound of steam whirring, the wheels of the locomotive slowly moved. The train full of gold started moving. In addition to the soldiers in each carriage, the last one is a flatbed car. There is also a team of soldiers with live ammunition. Outside the flatbed car, a pile of sandbags are piled up. In the middle of the flatbed car, a 25mm anti-aircraft gun is mounted. Yes, it's artillery. This is a temporary decision to install it. They are very concerned about this operation and strive to do the best in all aspects. In the middle of the carriage, a man with a grim face was smoking a cigarette in silence. Report. The train has left the station and no abnormality has been found for the time being. There are also soldiers from our international column along the way who are responsible for guarding A deputy said to him. Alexander Lornov, a senior official of the Soviet NKVD, who was in charge of the gold escort operation in Spain, did not dare to be careless at this time. Let our people monitor along the way, and the trains have to change their routes from time to time, Alexander said. As the person in charge, Lornov did not relax at all in this transportation task, because before coming, Minister Yezhov personally explained the importance of this task to him. Since the minister has said the importance of this mission to the Soviet Union, Lornov, who is a subordinate, will naturally not slack off in the slightest. Everyone in charge of guarding is not allowed to leave the train, and for easy to control front positions, there must be no less than 2 escorts for 24 hours under such strict protection. The train galloped all the way towards the destination Valencia. Woo! The train whistled and drove into the station. Inside the train, there was an unpleasant smell. In the past 2 days, they have almost gone around half of Spain. The downside is that they are about to fall apart in the past 2 days. The strongest fighters will collapse after being in the train for a few days. The good thing is that they finally safely transported the gold in this carriage to the port. Pushing open the compartment door of the train, a fresh smell of sea breeze blew over, and everyone felt much more comfortable. Quick. At this time, all of Lornov's eyes were bloodshot. In the past few days, he has revised the route many times, and finally, the gold has been safely transported to the port. Now, there is only one last thing left: put this gold on board. The train drove directly to the port, and there was still a distance of hundreds of meters from the train parking space in the port to the Soviet cargo ship Eugene parked at the dock. Just one last thing left. Lornov cheered up. He knew that he must not relax his vigilance now. Maybe those guys would come here to grab it. More than 500 tons of gold. This is a number that drives countless people crazy. Moreover, the transport work is very slow. Standing on one of the highest points of the pier, Lornov personally supervised the handling, which was the final task. As long as the gold is loaded onto the cargo ship, Lornov's mission will be over at the same time. In order to prevent accidents, the cargo ship Eugene will never act on its own. The destroyer, the Soviet warship Roth, has already arrived here at the same time, and will provide protection all the way when it returns. In fact, the size of this destroyer is a little small. If the news that the Eugene had transported gold leaked out, it might attract more pretenders. However, this destroyer represents the Soviet Union, and an attack on this warship means declaring war on the Soviet Union. Moreover, only this one is not enough to attract the attention of other countries. If a large number of warships are dispatched in a mighty manner, then other countries will definitely be the first to be alert. On the contrary, it will make the gold unable to be transported out, which is why the Soviet Union did not use the previous fleet of weapons and equipment to transport it. Too big is not a good thing, too noticeable. The most worrying thing is the land. As long as he gets on the ship and leaves the port, Lornov can breathe a sigh of relief. He didn't know that at this time, a few kilometers away from the port, someone was already observing the roof of a small building. As we guessed right, the Soviets really unloaded and loaded the ship from here. Facing the sea breeze and carefully observing this side with binoculars, Hull Monkman sat down and looked relaxed. This time, in order to ensure the smooth progress of the operation, Hull Monkman came all the way by plane. After finally seeing this batch of gold on board, Hull Monkman's heart was stabilized. For this batch of gold, Romania almost dispatched all the staff. Finally got them in Valencia. Next, you need to hand over the information to the military. You must know that the military has sent a lot of ships for this operation. Chapter 637 Robbery, Part 1. The Upper Eugene in the Atlantic Ocean is slowly traveling in the Atlantic Ocean accompanied by the destroyer Roth. There isn't much risk along the way, but it's not a bad idea. When crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, the inquiries from the British warship made the captain of the Roth, who was directing the transport operation, almost jump to the throat. But fortunately, in the face of Lexki's righteous words, the British warships that have not found anything can only be released. Near the Spanish waters, these capitalist countries are extremely wary of Soviet ships. This made Captain Lexki feel a little angry, and he was convinced that one day the great Soviets would sweep all these imperialisms into the garbage heap. But once it entered the Atlantic, it was much easier immediately. Without the entanglement of other countries' warships, The two ships of the heart and mind sailed to the destination Leningrad with all their strength. Yes, the sea route this time is from Valencia through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Atlantic Ocean, then bypassing the UK into the Baltic Sea, and arriving in Leningrad. It was also a helpless move for the Soviet Union to finally choose such a long way. In fact, the route from Spain to the Black Sea from the Mediterranean Sea is the shortest, the route chosen in history, but this route is under threat from Romania. Had the most stubbornly anti-Soviet nation been told that the shipment was gold, it might have been intercepted. So this route cannot be used as the first choice. The only option is to take the Atlantic line, and in order to avoid the busiest English channel, the Soviet Union deliberately chose to bypass the British Isles and not take the waterway. Therefore, the destroyer Roth and the freighter Eugene could only make a big circle and return to the Soviet Union. There is nothing to see in the seascape of the same color. On the endless sea, the Soviet Navy officers and soldiers also talked and laughed and were busy with their own affairs until suddenly I heard a creaking sound from the engine. As the most experienced wheeler with a bad sound, this is a situation where the engine is overloaded. The speed of the warship also slowed down. At this time, the phone in the engine room rang, and the chief engineer picked up the phone, which was the voice of the chief officer on duty. "What's going on? Why is the power of the ship decreasing?" "We are examining the cause," replied the chief engineer. At this time, the other marine soldiers also got up and gathered together. "What's going on?" as the captain, Lexky, hurriedly asked. The chief mate replied immediately, "I just called the chief engineer and they are checking." After a while, the long wheel reported that the engine was fine, as if the propeller was entangled in something. After sending soldiers down to check the results, Lexky felt a chill in his heart, and the propeller was entangled in a fishing net from somewhere. "What should we do now?" The chief mate, who heard the bad news, asked Captain Lexky how to solve it. In fact, he himself knows what to do in such a situation, and the best way is to send a professional boat to help. If there is no professional boat to help, you can only send someone to dive to cut off the fishing net. But the job takes days, and they just can't afford it. Captain Lexky, who heard the question from the first mate, thought about it and said, "Send a telegram to the nearest cruiser, the Volga, and ask them to come over immediately. In addition, let the Eugene continue to sail, and the Volga that came to meet them is just ahead of their route point." After receiving the order of Captain Lexky, the first mate immediately went to give orders to the Eugene. In fact, Captain Lexky's order was right, because when he suffered an accident and could no longer sail, it was right to let the protection target leave immediately. Because the Eugene is useless to stay here, it will only delay the transportation time. So after Lexky gave the order, the Eugene broke away from the Roth and sailed along the established course. Although the Eugene was temporarily out of protection, according to the speed of the ship, as long as it was tomorrow afternoon, it would be able to meet the Volga. But this is when all goes well. What if it doesn't go well? In the sea not far from the Roth, a periscope was stretched out to clearly see every move of the Soviets. An officer is watching intently at the sea, judging by the uniform he is wearing. This is the uniform of the Romanian Navy. Since there was a Romanian submarine here, the accident on the Roth could not have been an accident, and it was. I saw the officer put the periscope away and instructed the transmitter, "Send a report and tell them that the Eugene is currently sailing alone." That's right. This time the destroyer Roth was entangled in the propeller by the fishing net, which was done by the Romanian submarine force. For this operation, Romania sent more than 20 submarines alone, not counting other warships. In fact, this is also very simple. As long as the fishing nets are placed on the Soviet waterway in advance, satisfactory results can be achieved. Of course, this time the Roth got tangled up in the propellers was not the first trap set by the Romanian submarine force. In fact, the Roth and the Eugene have missed several traps, but they have not stepped on them. And this time the Roth was entangled in fishing nets, which is excellent news for the operation. Because of the lack of protection of the Eugene, the chances of this operation failing were greatly reduced. Of course, several possibilities were prepared for this operation, some of which were entangled in the Eugene, those in which both were entangled, and those in which the traps failed. No matter which one it is impossible for the Soviet Union to return Spanish gold this time. It can be seen from this that as World War II approached, Romania became more and more reckless in its style of doing things in the Atlantic. A fleet is sailing through the wind and waves. He would be very surprised if someone who knew something about the Navy came to see it. Because this is the country that the fleet belongs to in the Black Sea, how come its warships have come to the Atlantic Ocean? And this is a very powerful battleship. That's right. This fleet is the task force commanded by Major General Midrafil. This trip to the Atlantic is also to make it the last resort of this operation. As the commander, Major General Midrafil looked at the telegram he had just brought from the staff and heaved a sigh of relief. This is good news for him, because the last resort is likely not to be used. The submarine force has left its escort, and then we need to see if the operation team can control the ship. Major General Midrafil looked at the seascape outside the window and fell into contemplation. The error-free chapters of Romanian Eagle will continue to be updated on Shuba. There are no advertisements in the station. Please collect and recommend Shuba. If you like Romanian Eagles, please collect them. Romanian Eagles. Chapter 638 Robbery, Part 2. The night is getting deeper and deeper. The Eugene was sailing lonely in the Atlantic. The engine rumbled, and except for the crew on duty, everyone else on the ship had fallen asleep. But on the calm sea, there were several subtle engine sounds, which were mixed in the waves, and were barely audible under the cover of the Eugene engine. On the dark sea, several speedboats were rowing quickly on the sea. These speedboats were like ghosts on the sea. After flying over the top of the waves, even half of the speedboats left the sea when the speed was too high. At this time, on each speedboat, there were more than a dozen big men in casual clothes. They held submachine guns in their hands and were staring closely at the freighter in front of them. A big man at the head looked at the transport ship on the sea in the distance with a firm look in his eyes. He was the captain of the operation, Filkov. As the captain of this operation, Filkov has excellent abilities. There are countless tasks completed by his hands, and he is an indispensable sharp knife for Romanian intelligence services. And this mission is very important, so we will dispatch elite soldiers to complete this mission. But this time they need to play pirates. Since the advent of the profession of sailing, pirates have also been born. When sailing in the big seas, pirates can be said to be all over the world. However, with the development of technology, at present, the profession of pirates is almost invisible. After all, the times are developing, and the naval power of various countries has spread all over the world. The attack on pirates has made many people who do these knife-edge blood-sucking businesses die out. In this operation, the speedboat that Filkov and others rode on reached an astonishing 35 knots. At the same time, relying on good sound insulation measures, the noise of the speedboat is not too big. Reduce the speed. Filkov gave the order as the two sides got closer and closer. The speed of the speedboat also slowly decreased. This time the action needs to be approached secretly, so even if the sound of the speedboat is not loud, it needs to not disturb the other party. When the speedboat docked on the Eugene, Filkov waved his hand. Several big men stood up from the speedboat leaning against the cargo ship. They held cables with hooks and threw them onto the cargo ship. The hook hooked exactly on the side of the boat. Then, the big guys on the speedboat started boarding. Filkov was the first to climb the cable on his speedboat. The soft rope is a big test for the average person, and for them, the rigorously trained fighters, it is part of their daily training. Filkov was the first to climb onto the cable, and when he grabbed the gang with both hands, he leaped aboard and boarded the cargo ship. After the other team members got on the boat, Filkov immediately ordered, "Quick, according to the original plan, the first team will go to the wheelhouse and stop the boat. The second team will go to the lounge to control the crew. The third, fourth, and third teams will go to the lounge to control the crew. Squad 5 follow me to the cargo hold point." Before they set off, they had obtained the drawings of the Eugene, and they were quite familiar with the structure of the ship. Now, as planned, they are moving quickly. When Filkov led his team to the warehouse, a crew member appeared at a corner. A crew member who was in a hurry to solve it on the side of the ship, but the crew member who was still a little confused was still thinking about who these people were. And Filkov didn't give him a chance to wake up at all. One rough big hand covered his nose and mouth, one pulled it into his arms, and the other hand held a dagger and inserted it. The crew member's chest point. The crew member who was suddenly in danger struggled desperately. He wanted to push away the big hand covering his mouth and nose, and shouted for help to wake up the others. But Filkoff didn't give him a chance at all. His strong arms were like iron boxes to firmly fix the opponent point. Next, the crew member's body softened. The dagger that had pierced into his chest left blood on the ground. Filkoff, who had resolved this accident, exuded a strong murderous aura and ordered his team members, "Be careful and move on." Aside from a little turbulence here in Filkoff, the other two squads were doing very well. The Soviets never thought that they would be attacked by such a boarding ship, so they had no defense at all. Next, we need to see the actions of Filkoff's group. 2. At this time, the Soviet soldiers in the warehouse had already heard footsteps outside. This is the sound of footsteps from a large number of people. And why did so many people run down this night? Boom. At this moment, there was a violent explosion outside. With the sound of the explosion, the cabin door was violently blown open, and countless flying steel sheets instantly blew the Soviet soldier away. As for the action of the warehouse, after Filkoff had seized all other aspects, he no longer had any concerns. As long as the ship is not blown up, no matter how fierce it is, the ship will be abandoned in the end anyway. So he didn't plan to sneak in, just make a direct surprise attack and solve the opponent before the enemy reacts. The violent explosion woke the sleeping Soviet soldiers, who grabbed their weapons and planned to resist. As soldiers protecting the gold, they were the most loyal Soviet fighters. While waiting for the enemy to attack, several shadows were thrown in. Hearing the tinkling metal collision sound, the Soviet soldiers guarding were shocked. Could it be a grenade? In confined spaces, the power of using grenades is great. They looked at their feet in amazement, but found that the thing that came over was emitting blue smoke. Is it a gas bomb? Within seconds, they were coughing so violently that they were unable to pick up their guns at all. So they could only watch the armed men wearing gas masks and rushing in with submachine guns. Tug. The submachine gun continued to spit out flames. The 9mm bullets shot violently at the Soviet soldiers in the cargo compartment, and the gunshots continued. A famous Soviet soldier struggled and screamed. Blood was everywhere, and there were hid corpses everywhere. The gunfire ceased after a few seconds, and there was no more living Soviet soldier in the entire cargo hold. Filkoff looked at the results in front of him with satisfaction. Then he knocked on a wooden box, and everyone was fascinated by the golden light. Thinking that the warehouse is filled with such wooden boxes, many people feel short of breath. Snap. The lid was closed, and the sound blocked everyone's sight. Filkoff glanced at his team members with warning eyes, and his intention was obvious. This is a national thing, don't have any other intentions. Filkoff's warning was very effective, and everyone looked back. Signal that we have control of the cargo ship and the target has been captured. With the transmission of the signal, a freighter with a crane appeared in front of everyone after a while. The next job is simple. Cut the deck above the Eugene's cargo hold and lift the boxes with a crane. After several hours of handling work, the Eugene, which was already empty, was abandoned by Filkoff and his party. As Filkoff and the others left with a smile, the fate of the Eugene freighter, which was open to the sea valve, can be imagined. Chapter 639 Untitled. A day later, the crews of Olga appeared in this sea in a hurry. With a worried look on his face, Captain Nikolai raised his binoculars to observe around, but there was still the figure of the Eugene freighter. Could it be possible, Captain, that the Eugene's radio station is too bad and ran ahead of us? The first officer said. Another possibility worriedly. Captain Nikolai said. It's also possible. Let the dispatcher continue to call the Eugene, and also send a telegram to the Rage and the Komsomol, and let them continue to look for the Eugene. One day without a telegram from the Eugene, the Volga was worried. But there was no sign of the Eugene anywhere on the sea, which made Captain Nikolai, who was responding, feel that the situation was a little bad. Of course they couldn't find the Eugene that sank, and now the cargo ship Ploiesti, which was carrying more than 500 tons of gold, had joined the task force, and under its protection, it crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and entered the Mediterranean Sea. On the ship Ploiesti, a brief celebration was being held. Hull Monkman was holding a glass of wine and making a brief speech for the success of the operation. Nice job, lads. You are the heroes of Romania and the country is proud of you, so enjoy yourself. In Hull Monkman's speech, the team members of the action cheered. There is nothing more pleasing than a compliment from the head of one's own department. Hull Monkman looked at the excited players below and called Captain Filkoff to his side. Filkoff, this action did not disappoint me. You did a very good job. I applaud you. Facing the compliment from his boss, Filkoff said in return. Thank you for the compliment, Director. This is what we should do. This can only be done with the cooperation of other colleagues in the department and the Navy. Hull Monkman was satisfied with Filkoff's answer. I saw him continue to speak. Next, you need to lead the young man to continue to work hard and escort this batch of gold back to China with the boat. Hearing his boss's arrangement, Filkoff put down his glass and agreed. Please rest assured, Director, we will definitely protect a lot of gold and bring it back to China. Hull Monkman continued after Filkoff finished speaking. In this escort mission, in addition to you, there is also the help of the Navy. At this time, Admiral Midrafiel, the commander of the task force who had not spoken, interjected. Don't worry, you two. Next, I will escort you back home on the grounds that the Brebis, a heavy cruiser, has malfunctioned and needs to be repaired. In the face of Major General Midrafiel's speech, Hull Monkman said, thanks to the Navy for the support. It's all for Romania, of course. The news of the success of the operation needs to be known to Edel. If nothing else, just the credit for the intelligence department in this operation will not let Edel know too late. In fact, Edel got the news early in the morning after the successful operation. That's great. When Edel got the news of success, the whole person was very happy, even more happy than the previous capture of Kazan gold. The reason is very simple. Kazan gold is stored in Edel's memory, and it has been prepared for 6 or 7 years in order to seize it. This time, it took less than a month from knowing the news to the success of the action. One is that there is a long waiting period, and that kind of surprise has consumed a lot of expectations during this long waiting period. And this time it belongs to knowing and shooting, of course, full of expectations, and the joy after success is incomparable to the former. Now that this batch of gold has been captured, the issue of how to spend it cannot be avoided. The first is that the military and the intelligence services need to be separated, because this operation is entirely dependent on the cooperation between the military and the intelligence services among them. The intelligence department spent more than $5 million for this operation, not counting human and material resources. Due to the urgency of time and the urgency of the task, although there is information to be provided, the content of what he knows is limited, and it is impossible to fully understand the trend this time. Basically, everything is money. As for the military, it costs more. More than 20 submarines scattered in the Atlantic Ocean need a lot of cost, in addition to the cooperation of other warships. In addition, although the help the Army and Air Force can give is relatively small, they also need to share a portion of the profits. Although Edel can decide the purpose of this batch of gold in one word, but now that the atmosphere of World War II is becoming more and more intense, the attitude of the military must also be considered. Although the military is currently a staunch supporter of the royal family, any support requires interests to last long. Even Edel, as the most outstanding king of Romania, needs to consider the feelings of the military. In addition to these two, this batch of gold Edel intends to use part of it to stabilize the economy. Although Romania's current economy still looks good, it has already revealed hidden dangers. The wildly issued currency and the impact of the expansion of the military have made life difficult for ordinary people. After all, the inclination of resources to the military will inevitably affect the lives of the people. And Edel intends to take part to stabilize the lives of the people. Because Romania's economic background is insufficient, and the people's resistance to economic depression is not enough, it is best to stabilize it. As for the remaining gold, Edel planned to purchase various materials that Romania was in desperate need before the war, such as rubber, tin ore, tungsten ore, tung oil and other products. After all, in the next war, Romania has a lot of demand for these materials, and the country does not produce these materials. Without hoarding it in advance, is it possible to adopt other alternatives like Germany? While these alternatives can be used, they can only be alternatives. While Romania was elated to seize the gold, news of the Eugene's disappearance reached Moscow Point in today's Kremlin. Everyone's heart is trembling, because Comrade Stalin, who is the helmsman of the Soviet Union, is in a bad mood. Since Minister Yezhov entered the steel leader's office, the leader's roar can still be heard in the well-insulated room. There are not many things that can make Comrade Stalin lose his temper on the spot, so no one wants to get in the way. Crack. Stalin's famous corncob pipe flew a long distance and hit Yezhov's forehead with precision. The head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, who was hit, also had a frightened expression on his face. Facing the angry Stalin, even Yezhov, who was famous in the Soviet Union, did not dare to look at him. He was reluctant to meet Stalin this time, but he didn't dare to hide the big news of Jin's disappearance, so he could only bite the bullet and report to Stalin. After Stalin's mood calmed down a little, he looked at Yezhov, who dared not let the air out in front of him, and anger welled up in his heart. Check it out for me immediately. I want to know what kind of national power it is, and dare to touch the Soviet Union. Yezhov, who was instructed, hurriedly fled and left here. But he didn't notice that after he turned around, Stalin's eyes showed a trace of cruelty. Chapter 640 Battle 1. Not to mention the Soviet Union's search for clues about the disappearance of the Eugene all over the world. The two parties that have been supplemented in Spain are also preparing for a new round of battle. Dork, Battalion Commander Toledo, less than 60 kilometers from Madrid, is the most important stronghold of the National Army in the region. Since Toledo is so important, there are naturally enough troops stationed here, and it happens that the Romanian advisory group also has a force stationed here. Dork wiped the sweat from his forehead. He didn't expect Spain to be so warm in winter. He has just completed the maintenance of the tank, and is instructing other crews to maintain the tank. The maintenance of the guide wheel should not be sloppy, otherwise the tank will break down on the battlefield and you won't be able to cry. You need to check the wheel axle first, and then, while Dork was explaining, the crew members were listening intently. The captain also took out his notebook, listening and taking notes from time to time. Okay, do you remember what I said? Seeing the onlookers nodding non-stop, Dork went to the side to wash the dirt on his hands. Don't look at the majesty of the armored soldiers on the battlefield, but only know how hard it is every day. Regular training and maintenance are particularly cumbersome, and cannot be done without good patience and physical strength. And they are not even equipped with R-10 light tanks for less than half a year, and they need more proficiency. Speaking of which, this R-10 light tank is not small, with a total length of 5.14 meters, a width of 2.67 meters and a height of 2.51 meters. The total weight reaches 17.9 tons. The hull armor is 45mm in the front, 35mm in the sides, and 25mm in the rear. The frontal armor of the turret is 60mm, 45mm in the sides and 45mm in the rear, equipped with a 50mm 42x tank gun and two 7.92mm machine guns. Its engine is a 240 horsepower 10-cylinder diesel engine, with a maximum speed of 52 km per hour and a maximum range of 260 km. It can be said to be a very good light tank. As a newly developed tank, it naturally needs to pass the test of the battlefield. And there is no better place to test the performance of a tank than the Spanish Civil War. Therefore, a large number of new weapons, including the R-10 light tank and the R-20 medium tank, were tested on the battlefield in Spain. So for Romania, another benefit of the Spanish Civil War is to test the performance of weapons. Just after Dork had washed his hands, a messenger found him. The battalion commander asked me to go to the headquarters once. Yes, Captain. Dork, who received the reply from the messenger, couldn't help but wonder what the battalion commander had asked him to do. Could it be that he was going to the battlefield? Thinking of this, Dork's heart was hot. No way. So far, the ground battle, let alone Dork, other troops from Romania, have not been on the battlefield. However, unlike the aircraft of the Air Force, the ground forces have not engaged in combat, which is also caused by many aspects. First of all, they are not familiar with the environment. In addition, the smoke on the battlefield has subsided, and both parties are making a new round of preparations. There is also Lieutenant General Hoffman, the head of the advisory group, who hopes to show the power of the Romanian army on a weighty battlefield. Therefore, due to various reasons, the ground troops have not yet had the opportunity to play point. When Dork arrived at the battalion headquarters, the more he felt that he was really going to the battlefield, because the other 3 company commanders were all there. The battalion commander said after seeing that everyone was here. According to the order sent by the headquarters, our armored battalion will cooperate with the 11th Division of the 7th Division of the National Army to capture Brunet outside Madrid. The terrain here is suitable for our armored troops to fight, but I heard that their defending ability is very good. Repel many attacks by the National Army. The battalion commander's comments on the defenders did not attract the attention of Dork and others. It's not that they are arrogant, and the National Army's combat effectiveness is just that. According to their private evaluation of the current Spanish armies, the DRO army should have the highest combat effectiveness. The international column of the Soviet army was second, then the Italian army, and finally the National Army and the Republican Army. Since the battalion commander has given a big order, the few company commanders have nothing to say, just obey. And Dork took back the task and called the other car groups in his company. Just got an order from the battalion commander that we'll be fighting with the National Army in Brunet. Dork's words caused the other captains to show various expressions, and he continued to speak regardless of other people's expressions. Next, everyone needs to conduct a comprehensive inspection of the tanks and vehicles. I believe I don't need to teach you this. Dork's question attracted uniform answers from other captains. Need not. Very good, then everyone will prepare. If you are missing anything, say it quickly, and you won't regret it. If you don't go to the battlefield. As the day draws near, a new battle is finally coming. The armored battalion also left the camp and rushed to Brunet before, and would prepare to attack Brunet with the troops of the National Army. Artillery shells swept over the Republican Brunet positions, and a swarm of bombers appeared in the sky. The bombers from the 3 countries of DIRO were bombarding Brunet indiscriminately, and the positions were full of fire and smoke. Under the double blow from ground and air, the morale of the defenders suffered a heavy blow, because they had no means of counter-attacking the opponent. At present, the skies of the battlefield have been ruled by the National Army. New aircraft from the 3 countries of Germany and Italy have swept away the old aircraft of the Republican Army. Even the newly developed I-15 and I-16 fighter jets of the Soviet Union are not their opponents for this reason. The Soviet Union, which assisted the Republican Army, felt extremely embarrassed, thinking that its new aircraft could compete with other countries, but it was not its opponent at all. The fighting that he should be proud of is even more difficult to fight under the high-speed dive of the opponent. To this end, the Soviet Union has convened major aircraft design bureaus to develop a new generation of aircraft. However, research and development time takes time, and the situation on the battlefield cannot wait for people. So now the sky has been ruled by the National Army side supported by D. Royce. As for the Republican Army side, they can only use small teams to make surprise attacks. But even so, it was still consuming the air power of the Republican Army. So now the Republican Army side seems very passive. But what can be done about this? The assistance of the 2 parties is not at the same level. If the Spanish Republican government hadn't occupied the government's righteousness before and controlled more resources, it would be even more uncomfortable now. Therefore, seeing the soldiers on the position endured the blow from the air, the commander had nothing to do but replenish their troops. As for the anti-aircraft weapons, there are, but I don't know who is defending who after it is exposed. Because of the insufficient number of anti-aircraft weapons it is equipped with, it does not dare to fire at any time. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 641 Crossfire, Part 2. The continuous shelling and airstrikes will come to an end. The bombardment and airstrikes have finally come to an end, as the Republican Army has been looking forward to it for a long time. However, the soldiers of the Republican Army did not have time to catch their breath, and rushed into the position under the command of the officer. Hurry up, the rebels are about to attack. Point. The machine gun is set up here, and it can only be fired at my command. Point. When the Republican army in the position was busy responding to the next National Army attack, the armored group consisting of 38 R-10 tanks in front of them had already been equipped for combat, and Ork's company was on the left side of the team. Point. Attack. Point. After the commander of his tank battalion issued an order to attack on the radio, the tanks that had already been launched began to march towards the defenders' position. Behind them are 2 regiments of the National Army, who will follow in the footsteps of the tanks and launch an attack on the enemy positions. Therefore, the Republican officers and soldiers waiting for the enemy to attack failed to wait for the enemy infantry, but were the first to see the figure of the tank. Point. Enemy tank. Point. When the soldiers on the position saw the tank figure, they immediately panicked and shouted, "No way." Most of the soldiers in the Republican army were workers and peasants before they were mobilized after the outbreak of the Civil War. Many training can only be learned on the battlefield. It is the first time to face the battle with tanks, and it is impossible to say that you are not nervous. Unlike the panicked expression of the soldier, the officer immediately scolds, "What's the panic? Prepare anti-tank guns and anti-tank guns. In addition, have someone prepare explosives." Although many officers have not experienced combat with tanks, they are more or less the only way to deal with it. Point. With the order of the officer, the soldiers of the Republican Army took out the M1918 anti-tank gun previously issued to prepare. This anti-tank gun, developed by Germany in the middle and late of World War I, was the world's first anti-tank gun. The caliber of 13.2 x 92mm steel core projectile can penetrate 22mm thick armor within 100 meters. It is not outdated to deal with the thin-skinned light tanks of the 20s and 30s. However, relying on them to deal with Romania's R-10 tanks is a bit more than enough. Point. Of course, the Republican Army has other means besides this anti-tank gun. I saw that in the bunker not far behind the position, a M1930 37mm anti-tank had been pushed into the gun position. This is the Soviet imitation of the German Pak-36 37mm anti-tank gun, and the German tank gun is the famous 37 anti-tank gun. Point. And the Republican soldiers responsible for operating the anti-tank guns, after aiming at the intruding R-10 tank, follow the command of the gun emplacement commander to fire. Point. The tungsten core armor piercing projectile it fired immediately flew out of the muzzle, and after flying over a distance of 600 or 700 meters, it plunged into the soil next to an R-10. Point. No. Keep coming. Point. The gunner pulled the case out, reinserted a shell, and with a new round of aiming, another shell flew out. This time, unlike the previous one, this shell directly hit an R-10 tank and stopped it directly in front of the position. A conspicuous scratch appeared on the front of the tank, which was not penetrated. Point. However, the officers and soldiers on the position did not have such good eyes. They only saw that they had hit the enemy tank, and the Republican officers and soldiers on the position burst into cheers. By chance, the shell hit the tank where Dork was. The huge impact made everyone in the tank bruised, and Dork, who injured the pain, got up. Point. Dork was the first to ask, "Anyone hurt?" "No." Point. "I'm okay." Point. "It just hurts." Hearing the answers of the other crew members, Dork felt relieved. Then he felt a moment of fear, and then a burst of anger rose. Point. He immediately used the throat microphone to ask the other crew, "Have you found the location of the enemy anti-tank guns?" "No." Point. "I didn't see it clearly." Point. Just when Dork felt a burst of disappointment, a voice came, which gave him hope. Point. "I seemed to be at 10 o'clock on the left wing, and saw fire and white smoke. It should be there at 10 o'clock." Point. Dork, who got the position, immediately gave an order, so everyone pays attention to the 10 o'clock position. As long as the other party fires again, they will be able to catch him. Point. Sure enough, Dork didn't wait any longer, and the anti-tank gun that hit him opened fire again. This time it was directly seen by Dork. "So you are hiding here?" Point. Dork, who could see the location clearly, immediately reported his position to the other crews. 10 o'clock, in the grove to the right of that eucalyptus, where the anti-tank is. Now that you know the exact location, it's easier to handle. I saw a company of tanks parked directly, aiming at the small bush and ready to fire. Point. At this time, the commander, who was about to continue aiming and fired anti-tank shells, happened to see the nearly 10 tanks aimed at him. Point. Feeling horrified, he only had time to shout, No, runaway point. I saw nearly 10 shells flew over, giving everyone no time to react at all. Point boom boom. The exploding shrapnel swept across the gun positions, leaving everyone in a pool of blood, and at the same time, swept away the camouflage of the position. Point Dork, who was in command of the shooting, still felt uneasy, and continued to order another round of focused fire. Point boom boom. With a new round of concentrated fire, a louder explosion came. The anti-tank guns that had already been destroyed were blown apart, and a large number of fragments turned into deadly weapons and swept around. Point this is the sound of the shells exploding, which also represents the destruction of this group of anti-tank guns. The other anti-tank guns on the position are similar to this anti-tank gun, because now anti-tank guns are generally 37mm caliber light anti-tank guns. This kind of anti-tank gun developed in the late World War I and the 1920s was mainly to deal with light tanks that were not heavily armored at that time. Point now facing the newly developed R-10 tank in Romania, it seems to be lagging behind. Although the R-10 is defined as a reconnaissance and auxiliary function in the Romanian armored forces, its frontal 45mm small angle sloped armor cannot be penetrated by a 37mm gun. Point when the tanks were dealing with the anti-tank guns, the Republican soldiers on the position were also harassing with their own weapons, but it had no effect at all. Point equipped with explosive packs, and the anti-tank guns came close. Point for this unfavorable situation, the commander on the position can only come up with this method. Point however, I'm afraid that their hopes will be lost. After solving the anti-tank guns, the armored troops did not attack the ground by themselves. Instead, the machine guns on the ground were called 200 meters away. Point this is a method from Romania at the end of the battlefield. When it is not in a hurry to break through the enemy's position, it maintains a distance to suppress the enemy's firepower, which can more effectively help the infantry solve the battle. Therefore, the firepower of machine guns and mortars on the position, as long as it is found, will lead to a direct aiming shell. Point of course, this method is mainly used for the enemy's lack of anti-armor means to threaten himself. Point therefore, tanks that have no threat before the battlefield should not be too presumptuous. This made Lieutenant General Hoffman, who was watching the game, a little disgusted. These young men were too unscrupulous. However, although the armored soldiers showed some unscrupulous performance, their combat effectiveness was undoubtedly revealed. If it weren't for the fact that the Republican Army did not care about the casualties, and the subsequent reinforcement of the National Army did not keep up, the position would have changed hands in the first attack. Point however, the performance of Romania's first ground battle not only surprised the National Army, but also surprised the German and Italian advisory groups. After the war, both sides sent a telegram to the country introducing the battlefield performance of the Romanian army. However, Italy's main focus is on equipment, while Germany's focus is on the tactical use of tanks. Chapter 642 Strike. Romania began to deeply intervene in the Spanish Civil War, which may be big news for Spain in the Civil War, but for others it's nothing. Even in Romania the news isn't too surprising. Point for the current Romania, the domestic situation is more worthy of Edel's attention. Point this is how the same thing. Hull Monkman, who had just returned to China, had not had time to catch his breath when he was called by Edel to question him. Point it is certainly not a trivial matter to be called by Edel for questioning, because the largest strike in Romania broke out in Oradea. More than 80,000 workers and their families took to the streets, demanding increased wages, more vacation time, and the company should also be held responsible for the sickness caused by work. Faced with the sudden strike and protest, the local government on the one hand appeased the strike team and prevented the march from turning into an uncontrollable riot. On the other hand, local enterprise and factory owners are also required to make commitments to meet the demands of some workers in such a large-scale strike and demonstration. Of course, the local government also needs to report to Bucharest. In fact, for the people of Transylvania, a large area of the former Austro-Hungarian territory, the region has the most labor disputes, and the region has the lowest wages in Romania. The main reason is that on the one hand, the government's oppression of the Hungarians in the region has allowed some people to find opportunities to exploit loopholes. They aggressively recruited Hungarians as workers, kept their wages to a minimum, and owed their wages from time to time. Faced with this situation, the local Hungarians have reported to the government, but for some ulterior motive, nothing has changed at all. And this has also led to other ethnic workers. The local wages cannot rise at all. Perpetually lower wages than elsewhere, coupled with 2 years of currency devaluation, have led to price increases. This made the people in the area more and more dissatisfied, and some time ago, there happened to be a factory that fired more than 10 workers because of the accident. The workers, who had nowhere to vent their grievances, broke out completely. More than 80,000 workers and their families flooded the streets, and a vigorous strike began. And this is not the reason why Edel is angry. What really makes him angry is that behind the workers' strike, the resurgent Communist Party figure. Before the Romanian Communist Party encountered severe suppression in the outbreak of the Russo-Soviet War, the party's momentum in Romania was not as strong as before. And as people's living standards decline, the suppressed Communist Party is quietly growing. That left Edel alarmed at the resilience of the Communist Party. Dissatisfied that the intelligence agencies did not find any trace of the Communist Party, so after being praised for Operation Gold, the intelligence services were reprimanded in this strike. In fact, this cannot be blamed on the intelligence services. The strike was mainly caused by the lowering of the people's living standards and the government's oppression of the Hungarians. Moreover, with the severe suppression of the Communist Party by the intelligence services, its activities have become more and more hidden. But can this be used as a reason? Not at all. Because it would represent that the previous policy of the government was wrong, and His Majesty Edel, who made this decision, mishandled it. So the blame can only be borne by the intelligence department, who made them fail to discover this strike in advance. Edel looked at the atmosphere in front of him, and did not dare to come out of Hohenzollern, thinking that he has always been serious and responsible for intelligence work. And it is indeed inappropriate to be angry with him this time. Hohenzollern, who had suffered an unintentional disaster, said after seeing His Majesty's anger diminish, "Your Majesty, I'm going to increase the work of domestic intelligence. This kind of thing will never happen again." After sending Hohenzollern away, Edel called a guard. "Call Prime Minister Maharake here. I have something to order." That's right. It's time for Edel to revise the national policy that has been implemented for a long time. "Your Majesty, I don't know what you have to do with me." As soon as Prime Minister Maharake came up, he inquired about the reason for the summons. In fact, on the way here, he had some guesses, but it was just a guess, and he still needed to confirm it. Edel didn't beat around the bush, and asked bluntly, "What do you think of the Oradea strike?" In the face of Edel's question, Prime Minister Maharake answered without thinking, "Your Majesty, this is just a small group of black-hearted factories squeezing workers, leading to the expansion of labor management conflicts. Your Majesty does not need to be too alarmed about this. I believe it will be subsided soon." Hearing the Prime Minister's words, Edel knew that it was the Prime Minister who didn't want to blame the local government too much, because they were just implementing policies and how the government intends to deal with this strike. Recently, there has been some increase in domestic strike protests. Prime Minister Maharake heard Edel's inquiry and knew that it was just a rhetoric. There was some growth, and it was twice as fast as 2 years ago. As for Edel's sudden inquiries about how to deal with the strike, Prime Minister Maharake's heart moved. Does His Majesty have any other opinion on this? Because according to the original method, the government organized negotiations between labor and management, and tried to match the opinions of the two parties. And now His Majesty asks, there must be other opinions. I don't know what Your Majesty thinks. What should I do? His Excellency the Prime Minister, who has a mind in his heart, intends to ask Edel's opinion first. Since the Prime Minister asked, Edel did not hide it. I think it's mainly due to the underpayment in the region, because it's a bit unfair to the workers in the region. As far as I know, wages in the west of Transylvania are 10-15% lower than in other regions. I think it's a little unreasonable. Edel expressed his opinion, so that the Prime Minister has a bottom line. There are many reasons for the low wages in the region. And now that His Majesty has hinted, the policy in the region needs to be adjusted. In fact, Prime Minister Maharake is very aware of the oppression that the Hungarians have suffered, but who made him do too much before. And those people who are still in Romania now are basically made to be obedient. Maybe they can let go of their suppression and return to normal levels. Prime Minister Maherake, who wanted to understand, took Edel's words. Your Majesty is wise. The salary in this area was indeed low before, and those factories squeeze too much, which is not a good thing for the government. Then you can take this opportunity to raise the salary level in this area to the same state as other areas. Of course, this flat is flat to the baseline, so that its salary level is not too conspicuous, and many policies targeting Hungarians will be gradually lifted in the future. Now that the government has made a decision, the leadership of the next negotiation falls to the government. In the face of an unbiased government, the capital side has absolutely no way to contend, and directly accepts the outcome of rising wages. Of course, in order to prevent the labor side from taking the opportunity to raise its demands, the government said to its negotiators that this time it can only talk about the outcome. If the trouble continues, the government will no longer intervene. The labor side, who got the desired result, is already very satisfied that such a result can be negotiated. Chapter 643 Interview Part 1 Kang dang, bang dang. The train galloped along the rails to the distance, and the weather in early summer made people drowsy. Therefore, most of the people on the train are swaying again with the shaking of the carriage, and Du Yuming is writing a diary carefully. I benefited a lot from the conversation with General Guderian in Germany. The general's understanding of armored warfare was amazing. Let me know that the use of armor should not be too rigid, and it needs to be used flexibly. It is worthy of being the first person in German armored operations. However, during the conversation, General Guderian believed that his understanding of armored operations was far less than that of General Hoffmann. I hope that during this visit, I can meet General Hoffmann. While Du Yuming was writing his notes seriously, there was a knock on the door. Brother Guanting, can I come in? Du Yuming knew who it was as soon as he heard the voice, and immediately said loudly, Brother Frank, do you still need to be so polite between you and me? Come in. Gui Yanqing pushed open the door and entered, saw the diary on the side, and said with a smile, Yo, I'm still writing a diary. I didn't bother you. What's the matter? I'm just bored. Just writing to pass the time. In the face of Gui Yanqing's words, Du Yuming asked curiously, after explaining it casually, Brother Frank, why do you have time to come to me? Didn't I miss you? Speak English. Staying in the carriage is boring, and there is nothing to talk about with other people. I can only chat with you, an old classmate. After speaking, Gui Yanqing looked at Du Yuming enviously. This time you are more powerful than me, commander of the armor division. Hearing Gui Yanqing's words, Du Yuming quickly cleared the way. It's still a matter of 8 characters, so don't talk nonsense, Brother Frank. Seeing Du Yuming hurriedly clearing his own words, Gui Yanqing said immediately, what nonsense? One of the items of this visit is to purchase tanks and armored vehicles for Brother Guanting. You can hide this from me. Gui Yanqing looked like I had already known the inside story, which made Du Yuming feel helpless for a while. Seeing Du Yuming's helpless expression, Gui Yanqing immediately grabbed his shoulder and said, Brother Guanting is really lucky this time. Not only has he been appreciated by the principal, but even the head of MODOK highly recommends you. If it weren't for my unfamiliarity with armored operations, I would like to compete for this position of division commander. This is the armorer. You look at the power of Romanian armored divisions in the war between Romania and the Soviet Union, which is like treating the Soviet defense line as a no man's land. Hearing Gui Yanqing's words, Du Yuming didn't say a word. Du Yuming knew more about Romania's use of armored divisions in the Russo-Soviet war than his old classmate Gui Yanqing. The analysis report alone was more than a foot thick. Unlike Gui Yanqing, who pays attention to the performance of the armored divisions on the battlefield, Du Yuming pays more attention to the maintenance on weekdays, as well as the daily training cooperation of the armor. And in the conversation with Guderian, it further let him know that his idea is correct. Tanks and armored vehicles can play their best role on the battlefield only by paying more attention to daily maintenance and maintenance. While Du Yuming was talking with Gui Yanqing, at the front of the carriage, the special envoy of the delegation, Minister of Finance Kang Xiangxi, was also talking with Wang Wenhao, Secretary General of the Executive Yuan. Minister, this visit to Europe has achieved remarkable results, and most of the tasks assigned by the chairman have been completed. I believe that the minister will be able to succeed in the next trip to Romania. Hearing Wang Wenhao's praise, Kong Xiangxi waved his hand with a smile on his face. Where is this? It's all thanks to everyone's help to live up to the chairman's trust. Speaking of which, the Japanese are getting more and more restless in North China, and the chairman can't sleep at night because of this. Although Kang Xiangxi said that this was everyone's credit, but looking at his expression, he knew that he was very proud of the remarkable results of this visit. However, seeing that Kang Xiangxi turned the topic to the Japanese, Wang Wenhao, as his deputy, of course went on. Yeah. Everyone knows the Japanese is wolf ambitions. But the country is difficult. Those people outside only know the anti-Japanese slogans, and the war needs military pay and ordnance. Do they know this? It's all to blame Zhang Hanqing for misunderstanding the country. If it wasn't for him and Zhan doing such a foolish thing, this bandit has been wiped out long ago. We can concentrate more on dealing with the Japanese threat. The chairman is still magnanimous, and it can also let Zhang Hanqing feel at ease. Hearing Wang Wenhao's words, Kang Xiangxi didn't want to talk more on this topic. Okay, this time our mission is to visit Europe. The mission given by the chairman is the most important. As for Zhang Hanqing, let him stay in Nanjing. It was obvious that Kang Xiangxi was also angry with this young master of the Zhang family, and he couldn't find Betty after being fooled for a few words. This young master of the Zhang family was really too young. If it weren't for the wealth that the Zhang family left him, this man would have disappeared long ago. Hearing that Kang Xiangxi pulled the topic back to visit Europe, Wang Wenhao said immediately, the results of this visit to Europe are remarkable enough. Not only did we meet Hitler, but we also got a credit loan of 120 million marks. This kind of achievement is enough for people in China to see. Because Wang Wenhao does not show off. The current annual fiscal revenue of the national government is only more than 700 million fiat. Because of the assistance from Romania, the fiscal revenue is a little higher. According to the current ratio of marks and fiat currencies, it is almost 1:1. 13% of income loan. Although this loan can only purchase its weapons in Germany, it is not a small sum of money for the current Republic of China. And this amount is 20% higher than in history, because there is competition from Romania, so Germany is a lot more generous. Hearing Wang Wenhao's complacent words, Kang Xiangxi continued. Don't be careless, the next visit to Romania is very important to our country. This time, the chairman of the standing committee specially asked me to pay a visit to His Majesty Edel to express my gratitude. I hope that the next visit will be able to get a new loan from Romania. And this time the Navy also wants to order warships in Romania. The chairman has promised Chen Xiaoquan to meet the requirements of the Navy. Otherwise, why did Chen Xiaoquan come with the group this time? Isn't it for his ship? It is not necessary to mention the current Navy of the Republic of China here. As the maritime power of this big country, at present the Republic of China Navy ships only have 2 or 3 kittens, which cannot be ranked in the world at all, and their warships are basically old-fashioned warships before the First World War. Despite the small size of the temple, the demon wind was very strong at that time. In this regard, the Navy is divided into several factions this time. The Nanjing government promised to purchase the Navy because it was really broken and out of shape. And the current financial situation is a little better, so we can arrange a little for the Navy. Chapter 644 Interview, Part 2. On the broad avenue, a motorcade was driving at high speed under the escort of the military and police. These vehicles can be seen from the national flag on the front of the car. This is a visiting group of the Republic of China, because the blue sky and white sun flag is attached to it. In the third car, Kang Xiangxi, head of the delegation, was communicating with Ambassador Zhu Jialuo. Do you have anything else to add about the interview? There is no more. This Edel is still easy to say. There is nothing to be avoided. Moreover, in the process of meeting with him, I also noticed that his attitude towards our country is very friendly. Ambassador Zhu's words did not make Kang Xiangxi relax, but made him more cautious. Because of this visit to Romanian King Edel, he was repeatedly told by his brother-in-law, this time, we must let the other party feel the kindness and gratitude from the Republic of China. For this reason, even the gifts given are better than those in Germany. In Germany, Hitler was presented with a vase carved with vermilion lacquer, a volume of finely printed song paintings and colloquium, a piece of Hunan embroidery and 2 boxes of famous tea. This time, Edel was presented with a pair of green jade bowls, a pair of shoe brocade embroidery and 2 boxes of famous tea point. Because of this visit, he came with a request. In the next meeting, he will put forward the request of the Republic of China, hoping that Romania will provide the Republic of China with a credit loan, so that the Republic of China can purchase Romanian weapons and equipment. In the previous combat experience, Rhodes Armament Equipment National Revolutionary Army's combat effectiveness was fully revealed, so the subsequent reorganization of the army has been going on. At present, 3 batches of troops have completed their replacement, with 19 divisions, compared with only 8 divisions in history. To complete the transformation of German equipment, the efficiency has been greatly improved. In this, cheap ordnance from Romania and loans are inseparable. According to statistics, Romania's loan to the Republic of China has reached 810 million lei. Most of the loans are used by the Republic of China to purchase ordnance. And this time Khan Xiangxi's visit is to continue the loan. Because with Japan's pressing, let Nanjing smell the breath of war. In order to maximize the combat effectiveness of the army, this time Khan Xiangxi intends to purchase nearly 100,000 equipment at one time. And cheap arms from Romania are indispensable. And the Nanjing government can't come up with so much money, so I hope Romania will continue to carry on the barter model. The convoy soon came to the palace, and Khan Xiangxi finally met Edel under the leadership of Foreign Minister Kostel. Hello, Minister Khan Xiangxi. Facing Edel's greetings, Khan Xiangxi, who was cheered up, responded quickly. Hello, Your Majesty Edel. My visit this time brings the Republic of my country's gratitude to Romania for its help to our country over the years. As Khan Xiangxi spoke, the guard put the gift he brought in front of Edel. Looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar gift in front of him, Edel said with a smile, "Your country is welcome." Where this is completely less than 1/10,000th of your country's help to the Republic of China. After the guest of honor was seated, Khan Xiangxi began to express the intention of the visit. Your Majesty, our country has always been grateful for your help, and our country also intends to strengthen the military and economic ties between the 2 countries. Because our neighbor, Japan, put too much pressure on our national defense. They occupied the northeast of our country before region, and then stirred up trouble in Shanghai, threatening the order of the free world. And they are not satisfied with this, and then they provoked the conflict in and then there is the Great Wall War of Resistance, and now they have ambitions for North China. It can be said that Japan has seriously threatened the order and stability of the Far East. Hearing Khan Xiangxi talk about the current difficulties of the Nanjing government, Edel felt a little ridiculous. This Khan Xiangxi can be said to be the largest embezzler in the Republic of China, and his reputation for exploiting power for personal gain and corruption can be clearly seen. And in the future, this one will make Zhao Jiang lose face in fighting tigers. Moreover, the reputation of her daughter, Miss Kang is even more eye-catching, and it can be said that she is a lawless master. However, although I have long been familiar with its name, it is the first time I have seen a real person, and it does not look outstanding. Khan Xiangxi, who did not know that Edel's thoughts had already soared to the sky, continued to speak. So our country hopes to get Romania's help to resist Japanese encroachment. In the face of Khan Xiangxi's request of the Republic of China, Edel said sternly, "Minister Kang, the cooperation between our country and the government of the Republic of my country is mainly in the economic and military. You should also know that our country has no ability to intervene in the Far East. No way." Although Edel really wanted to help the Republic of China defend against the Japanese invasion, Romania was really overwhelmed. If nothing else, as far as Romania is concerned, no matter how long you stretch your hand, you can't reach it. In addition, the fat boy decides his head, and the help Edel can give to the Republic of China needs to be done without harming the interests of Romania. In the next war of resistance, Romania's wealth was not enough for the Republic of China government to squander. He knows that sentence. The front is tight and the rear is tight. Even Americans with deep pockets were slapped with corruption in the Republic of China. In the face of Edel's words, which obviously had nothing to do with the situation in the Far East, Khan Xiangxi was not surprised at all. This is just to try out the idea of Romanian intervention in the Far East in the future. Of course there are the best, and it doesn't matter if he doesn't, because in Germany he already has the promise he wants. Therefore, Kong Xiangxi continued to propose. Your Majesty, we understand that your country cannot intervene in the situation in the Far East. I wonder if we can continue to provide a loan to our country in order to arm our army. The situation in East Asia is very tense at present, and our country hopes to obtain a new batch of loans of weapons and equipment. Of course, it would be best if it could be paid for in ore, raw materials, and agricultural products. Facing Kong Xiangxi's new request, Edel nodded and answered. There shouldn't be a problem with this, you just need to discuss with the government. Point. After getting the result he wanted, Kong Xiangxi took the opportunity to mention it. Your Majesty, in addition, our country hopes to purchase some tanks, aircraft, and warships. I hope your country can agree to our request. Point. Regarding the request of the Republic of China to purchase these weapons and equipment, Edel replied after thinking about it. This requires you to submit a list. Some equipment can be provided by our door, and some can't be helped. Point. No way. Although Edel wanted to sell the new weapons to the Republic of China to support their resistance, but according to the poor confidentiality measures of the Republic of China, some equipment was really afraid to sell to them. Point. And he remembered that the Republic of China was also aided by the Soviet Union. If the Soviets were familiar with Romania's new equipment, then the threat to Romania would be great. Point. As for Edel's words, Kong Xiangxi also expressed understanding. After all, the Republic of China is the buyer, and Romania is the provider. Those who can buy still need Romania to have the final say. Chapter 645 Visit, Part 2. General Chen, please this way. Point. An officer introduced Chen Xiaoquan in English. This is the largest naval shipyard in our country, Varna, which can build 3 battleships at the same time. Its largest dock is 300 meters long and 50 meters wide, and it can build warships of up to 60,000 tons. But at present we cannot build such large warships, because it's such a waste. Point. Chen Xiaoquan listened enviously to the introduction of the naval officer. The Republic of China could not even build a 60,000 ton warship, even a 1,000-ton cruiser. After introducing the dock, the officer pointed to a steel monster that was about to be outfitting. This is my country's latest battleship Vlad, and its 406 caliber artillery can deal with all the battleships in the world. This is also the crystallization of my country's shipbuilding industry. Point. Looking at the outfitting steel behemoth on the side, there are 9 giant cannons that can hold 1 person, and Chen Xiaoquan's eyes are straight. If such sea monsters appeared in East Asia, no one would be their opponent. Even the Nagato class battleship, which Japan should be proud of, cannot be its opponent. Point. Not to mention, the speed is also far superior to Nagato by a large margin. Needless to say, the advantage of speed in naval battles. After introducing the industrial crystal battleship, the naval officer pointed to a smaller battleship docked in the distance. This is our country's heavy cruiser Cortinu, and its top speed of 34.5 knots is also capable of performing almost all tasks of the Navy. Point. This is the latest Romanian heavy cruiser. Compared with the previous heavy cruiser, the biggest change of this battleship is to wait for the enhancement in armor and speed. Of course, what makes it so balanced is that it exceeds the standard in tonnage. Point. Compared with the standard displacement of the previous Brebeza of 11,000 tons, the standard displacement of the Cortinu reached 13,500 tons, and the full load reached 15,850 tons. More excessive than the severely over-standard Dutch class. What makes Romania so unscrupulous is the arrival of the Washington Naval Treaty. Italy also withdrew from the naval treaty after Japan refused to renew it, marking the end of the naval holiday. Romania, of course, will no longer abide by this treaty. Therefore, in order to cope with the large number of 10,000-ton heavy cruisers from other countries, this class of heavy cruisers was born. It should be noted here that this is also the last heavy cruiser in Romania. Because the Navy still thinks that the role of heavy cruisers is a bit tasteless. After comparing the cost and function, it can't be on the battle line, and the usual escort tasks are overkill. Therefore, after the comparison, it is still believed that either continuing to build battleships or building light cruisers and destroyers is more in line with the actual needs of the Romanian Navy. As for Chen Xiaoquan, whose eyes were red, he naturally knew his expenses. This time, he just came to purchase 4 destroyers and 3 submarines. These funds are not enough to purchase anyone in front of him. When Chen Xiaoquan felt sorry that he couldn't buy good things, Du Yuming was also worried about his lack of wallet. This is the R10 light tank that our country can provide. The total weight of the tank is only 17.9 tons, which is completely suitable for your country's roads and bridges. Don't look at the tonnage of this tank, but the 50mm tank gun equipped with this tank is enough to deal with it. The armored power of your country's imaginary enemy Japan, and the armor of this tank is enough to deal with Japan's 37mm gun. The maximum travel speed is 52 km per hour and the maximum travel is 260 km. It can quickly chase the opponent and get out of the battle. Tanks suitable for your country. Listening to the leading officer introducing the R10 tank in front of him, Du Yuming had to admit that the other party completely spoke to his heart. Even Gui Yanqing, who followed him by the side, was full of light, convinced by the excellent performance of this tank. Brother Guanting, the performance of this tank is so excellent that it is really worth buying. After listening to Gui Yanqing's evaluation in his native language, Du Yuming had a headache. Because good performance must have a worthy price. This is the unchanging truth. However, Du Yuming, who was somewhat lucky, still asked, "How much does this tank cost?" 140,000 lei per car. If you buy more than 80 cars, then we can also give a 5% price reduction. Is this price high? It is not high at all. At present, the purchase price of the Romanian military has reached 110,000 lei, which is really a conscientious price compared to the arms sales of other countries. At present, the general arms sales in the world are 50% higher than that of domestic purchases, which is already considered a really low price. However, even this low price has dispelled Du Yuming's desire to buy. No way. If you buy this tank, then the money for this purchase is simply not enough to form an armored division. Although the armored division of the Republic of China is not the same level as Romania, it is still unaffordable. Because the armored division established by Du Yuming this time is composed of 2 motorized infantry regiments, an artillery regiment, an armored regiment, and other affiliated units, there are only more than 11,000 people, and the tanks it is equipped with are only 120. More than 10 vehicles, 9x3x4 plus 6. If the R10 tank is purchased, the cost of the tank alone is as high as more than 17 million lei, not counting the cost of other artillery vehicles. If you add these and spare parts, the cost will be more than 30 million lei. This is enough to form several infantry divisions. Du Yuming did not think that the armored division he formed was worth the cost of the chairman. So Du Yuming could only hold back and ask the tank without looking at it, "Are there any other tanks that are cheaper?" Whenever I think of this officer, I immediately answer some. Then take me there. Going to the other end, the officer pointed to the tank in front of him and said, "This is the Jackal 4th tank currently equipped in our country. The total weight of the tank is 18.1 tons. Its 47mm tank gun can also deal with the threat from Japan, and its frontal armor of 35mm can basically deal with the 37mm of Japanese tanks. Gun. Its top speed is 35 km/h and its maximum range is 180 km." Du Yuming was basically satisfied with the performance of the Jackal 4th tank. Although the performance of the R10 tank has dropped a lot, it is enough to deal with the Japanese Type 89 and Type 95 tanks. So Du Yuming took the opportunity to ask the question he was most concerned about. How much does this tank cost? The price is 80,000 lei each. It seems that this time there is no discount. However, after hearing the offer, Du Yuming felt that the price was good. This is at least compared to the R10 just now. Du Yuming feels that this Jackal 4th tank is more suitable for him. After all, he has a small budget. Well, we'll choose this one. Chapter 646 Interview. End. At the Konda aircraft factory on the outskirts of Bucharest, a group of officers is visiting the aircraft produced by the factory. One of them, a yellow-skinned officer dressed in a completely different uniform from the Romanian Air Force, became the focus of the conversation. Gayo, this is the Albatross fighter we are currently equipped with. The aircraft adopts a single wing structure with a total length of 7.53 meters, a wingspan of 11.31 meters, a height of 3.10 meters, a total weight of 1317 kilograms, and a maximum takeoff weight of 1942 kilograms. It is equipped with an air-cooled 10-cylinder radial piston engine. The maximum output horsepower is 840 horsepower. The maximum speed can reach 440 km per hour. The maximum range is 950 km, and the limit is raised to 11,200 meters. It is completely suitable for your country, and compared with the current equipment in your country Hawker 3 fighter jets, there is simply no comparison. Gheozahan listened to the chatter in his ear. The Romanian Air Force officer introduced the aircraft performance to himself, and looked at the Albatros parked at the test site, and his heart burst into flames. Can I drive it myself? As an ace pilot, there is nothing better to know about its performance than to fly it yourself. And for Gheozahan's request, the officer clearly understood the mood of a pilot, so he asked without hesitation, Geo, do you know how to operate this plane? It can't be learned, and I believe that the operation of this aircraft will not be too complicated. As long as it is an aircraft, I can fly it. This is also Gheozahan's confidence as a pilot. In fact, the operation of the current piston aircraft is not too complicated. As long as you can drive a fighter, you can learn the operation of other aircraft very quickly. Of course, this is limited to flying. If you want to make various extreme operations, you must be more familiar with this aircraft. Of course, after the jet appears, the pilot's operational requirements will be further strengthened. Otherwise, no matter how tens of thousands of pilots in various countries are trained, they will be able to train. After flying for dozens or hundreds of hours, seeing Gheozahan's firm attitude, the Air Force officer made a compromise. Okay then, Geo. I'll have someone teach you to avoid possible accidents. After being allowed, Gheozahan boarded the plane. In an accompanying pilot's presentation, he had a lot of confidence in operating the Albatros, because it is not much different from the Hawker 3 fighter that he drives. After starting the plane, Gheozahan clearly felt its surging power. Compared with the most advanced Hawker 3 in the Republic of China, its power is stronger. After slowly releasing the handbrake, the plane began to accelerate. After taxiing for a while, Gheozahan felt that the speed was enough, and with a sharp pull, the plane immediately left the ground. Compared with the takeoff distance of the Hawker 3, the Albatros is much shorter. He is here to evaluate the driving of the Albatros. Then the next step is to test the performance of the aircraft. After Gheozahan performed a circling test, he pulled it sharply, and the Albatros immediately began to climb rapidly. Faster climbs than the Hawker 3, he commented. When it climbed to an altitude of 7,000 meters, the nose began to dive down. Then Gheozahan performed a series of operations to make the performance of this Albatros fully displayed in front of him. When Gheozahan was driving the Albatros to perform various extreme operations, the officers below all showed stunned expressions. Are you sure this tall guy touched this plane for the first time? I'm a little suspicious of what you said. This Geo, has he served in the Romanian Air Force? Gheozahan, who was completely unaware of his actions and shocked the Romanian officers, was full of praise for the performance of this Albatros. It's a good plane, really good. And just in the distance in the sky, a plane flew at high speed, but it caught his attention. The reason is very simple. This plane that I have never seen before is too fast. He would bet that the plane was absolutely 600 km per hour, which was as fast as lightning. What plane is this? At this time, Gheozahan immediately focused his attention on the new aircraft. I heard that a lightning fast plane also appeared in the Spanish War. I don't know if it has something to do with it. However, the plane just flew by from a distance, and Gheozahan had no chance to catch up and ask. After the next test, he was immediately surrounded by a group of officers as he got off the plane. Geo, you have flown Albatros before. Geo, this can't be your first time flying. I facing the surrounding officers, Gheozahan had no choice but to tell the truth. This is really my first time flying, but the Hawker 3 I flew before was similar in operation to an Albatros, so I was able to fly so well. After hearing Gheozahan's explanation, the officers surrounding him did not continue to ask In fact, the operation of the Hawker 3 is very different from that of the Albatross, but because there are not many countries where this aircraft is purchased, they are fooled. Point and right here, Geozahn expressed the doubts he encountered in the sky. I saw a plane I've never seen before, and its speed can reach 600 kilometers per hour. Do you know what's going on? His questioning immediately silenced the scene when an officer spoke. That's the demonstrator we're testing, and it only has the advantage of being fast. Point and this officer's words immediately attracted the echoes of other officers. Yes, this is a verification machine. No big deal. Point Geozahn stopped asking about the explanations of the officers because he thought it was a no-brainer. If they wanted to tell him, they would have said it long ago. Point, and he suppressed the doubts in his heart and continued to discuss the purchase of Albatross fighter jets. He still recognizes the main combat power of this Romanian equipment. However, Minister Khan needs to discuss with Romania the issue of borrowing. Otherwise, he would have no money to buy the fighter he valued. Point. While the officers of the regiment were purchasing ordnance, discussions were underway in Bucharest on the loan. Point Mr. Special Envoy, you know what your country intends to use as collateral for this loan. Point at the beginning of the opening, Maharike, who was the Prime Minister, was the first to ask questions. He couldn't help but say nothing, because the loan amount requested by the Nanjing government was a bit high this time, which made him, the Prime Minister who worked so hard for Romania, feel a burst of anger. Its loan request of up to 280 million lei, and there is not enough collateral. How can it not make the Prime Minister feel dissatisfied? Point for the dissatisfaction expressed by Prime Minister Maharike, Kong Xiangxi and Wang Wenhao both had a hint of helplessness on their faces. Because there are so many things that need to be purchased in Romania this time, if the loan is not used, the Nanjing government will not be able to buy it at all. As for the issue of insufficient collateral, it is also because the raw materials that Romania needed before were mortgaged by the Republic of China in exchange for weapons and equipment. Point however, in the face of Prime Minister Mahalaka's question, Kong Xiangxi, the Special Envoy, said, Your Excellency Prime Minister, the loan this time is indeed a lot more than in the past. Regarding the issue of insufficient collateral, in fact, this is easy to solve. As long as my country increases its export efforts, it can repay in time. And it is the first time that my country has borrowed money. It is about to be repaid, and the collateral of the loan can be transferred to the name of the loan after the repayment is completed. Kong Xiangxi's words caused a discussion in Romania, because there is absolutely no problem with the operation of this mode. However, considering the current situation in the Far East, many people are a little worried. Point in fact, Romania has also assessed the current tension between China and Japan. This is the unanimous view that a war is destined to break out between China and Japan in the future. However, there are differences in the timing of the outbreak. Point optimists believe that the war between the two countries should break out around 39 years, not more than 40 years. The pessimists believe that war may break out between the two countries at any time. Especially in this year, Japan's continuous actions in China have made many people think that the war will start this year and next. Point Romania's prediction of the outbreak of war between China and Japan has a lot to do with Romania's current loans to China. Because if war comes, it will cause heavy damage to its raw material exports, and its repayment ability is questionable. Point after all, Romania's money is not blown by the wind, and the risk needs to be controlled. Point therefore, it is impossible for Prime Minister Maharike to agree to Kong Xiangxi's words. Even so, Mr. Special Envoy, the amount of this loan is too large. The risk to our country is too staggering. Point we cannot deny the risks mentioned by Your Excellency the Prime Minister. But you must also see that our country's loans are all used to buy your country's products. This can help your country expand sales and get out of the current economic difficulties. And in terms of our country's repayment ability, I believe that your country in the previous cooperation is also very clear. Kong Xiangxi has been talking about the Nanjing government's repayment credit from economic issues. There is only one meaning to express. You have to believe in the integrity and repayment ability of the Nanjing government. Point for this reason, the Prime Minister was still a little hesitant, but after many discussions, and with the strong push of a person with a heart, the negotiations between Romania and Nanjing were finally negotiated. This time Romania will provide a loan of 250 million lei, which the Nanjing government can use to purchase various Romanian products and return them with raw materials such as tungsten sand and antimony sand. The interest on the loan is 5% per annum, no interest is paid on the unused amount, and no interest is paid on the repaid amount. After signing the loan terms, the delegation immediately purchased a large amount of weapons and equipment. These include 180 Albatros fighter jets, 122 Jackal 4th tanks, 80 four-wheeled armored vehicles, 118,000 rifles, and 150 million machine gun bullets, 248 75mm mountain and field guns, 38 105 howitzers, 8 150 cannons, 10,000 tons of various shells. There are also anti-aircraft machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, 37mm anti-tank guns and a large number of weapons. In addition, there are a series of materials such as helmets, raincoats, rain boots, medicines, field phones, radio stations, vehicles and so on. It took more than 20 ships to transport these materials in Romania alone. Of course, many weapons were exchanged from the Romanian military. The military in the process of refitting is very happy that someone bought it, which means they can use the new equipment again. It is also because of the existence of these second-hand equipment that it can purchase so many military supplies, and these weapons and materials effectively helped it fight after the outbreak of the anti-Japanese war, so that the Japanese government specially protested for this, protesting that Romania violated the terms that countries should not provide large caliber artillery to the Republic of China, so that it suffered great losses. Chapter 647 Outbreak. While Kang Xiangxi's delegation and the purchased weapons and materials were still being loaded into Romania, a conflict in North China was intensifying and gradually turned into a war in early July. The Japanese army exercised near Peeping and demanded that Wanping city be searched under the pretext of the disappearance of a soldier. The local squadron refused their unreasonable demands, and then the Japanese army used this as an excuse to attack Wanping city. With the start of the battle in Wanping city, it also marked the outbreak of the War of Resistance. The Nanjing government, which had no way to retreat, could only go to war because North China was an area that it could not give up, and the domestic public opinion had already been full of public grievances, and there was no room for it to retreat. Of course, in addition to the two parties involved in the war that broke out in the Far East, other countries are also paying attention. But no one is more concerned than Romania, because the ink on the loan of 250 million lei just signed has not yet dried. Damn, do these Chinese people know that war is going to break out, so they are borrowing such a large sum of money. At the Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister Maharake couldn't help but swear after the outbreak of the war in the Far East. When he got this news, it was as uncomfortable as eating a fly. Because after the war broke out, the Nanjing government's repayment execution power was questionable, and the thought that this loan was negotiated by him made him even more uncomfortable. Although His Majesty Edel also played a role in this, it was him who was clearly responsible. Besides, does he dare to speak out about Edel? It's not just himself who is to blame. So he has to bear the blame if he doesn't. No one can be in a good mood when he bears the blame, and Maharake, the Prime Minister, is no exception. Would you like to stop their supplies at the port? Seeing Maharake's rage, the secretary couldn't help but give a suggestion, but in exchange for a blank eye. What a bad idea to keep weapons and supplies at the port. For what reason to stop it? Romania will lose face. The secretary, who knew he had said the wrong thing, hurriedly fled out. When the Prime Minister was angry, Edel took the telegram and pondered. The outbreak of the anti-Japanese war was actually expected long ago, and the previous visit of Kang Xiangxi was an obvious signal. However, there is not much Romania can do to help in this matter. Still, Edel did his best to help. For example, if you sell the replaced equipment to Nanjing at half price, you can talk a little bit about your feelings. But Romania can only give so much help. There will be no more, because Romania has its own interests, and it can be used to ensure the market and raw material base. If there are more, it will be too conspicuous, Your Majesty. This is a war game report made by the military. As Edel pondered, a guard placed a report on his desk. Thanks to the fact that Romania has a military advisory group in the Republic of China, Romania is very familiar with the intelligence of the People's Liberation Army. In order to protect the interests of Romania, the military conducted a military exercise of the Sino-Japanese War, and the result has already come out. Edel took this game report and looked at it. In the Romanian military's game, the Chinese side's results were not very good. First of all, in North China, the Romanian military's opinion is to give up North China and defend it according to the Yellow River. The Taihang Mountains on the flanks need to be defended to ensure geographical advantages in the Yangtze River Delta area. The Romanian military's opinion was to delay the actions of the Japanese army, take advantage of the dense local river channels to slow down the enemy's attack speed, and buy time for the government, factories, and people to evacuate. In Guangzhou and Fujian in the south, it is necessary to organize government agencies, factories, and people to transfer as much as possible. Because the Japanese Navy is unmatched by the Republic of China, it must avoid the enemy's advantages and try to stretch the enemy's supply line. As for the crucial Yangtze River waterway, it needs to be blocked to prevent it from being used by enemy navies. Of course, this plan is not a complete retreat. In Romania's prediction, it is necessary to block Japan's military industry into 3 disconnected parts. The first is North China, the second is the Yangtze River Delta, and the third is the Pearl River Delta. The Romanian military believes that its main rear is in the Wuhan area, and the Japanese army must not threaten it here, as the essence of the rear's food and human industry. Then use the advantages of terrain and manpower to consume the opponent until the Japanese army can't bear the consumption of the war, and then launch a counterattack to gradually pay for the lost ground. In fact, this war game made by Romania is also a method of exchanging territory for advantages, but the difference from history is that this plan uses Wuhan as the rear, not Shenzhen. The reason given is that the current civilian military forces can protect the area from the threat of the Japanese army, coupled with the ability to take advantage of the resistance of the people in the occupied areas to the invaders. The Japanese army cannot use the manpower and resources of the occupied areas. Of course, the military's deductions underestimated the brutality of the Japanese army, because in the previous wars in Europe, everyone had to talk about civilization. Also, this is only from a military point of view, with insufficient political consideration. Because first of all, for the city of Shanghai, the military's opinion is to give up. Because it is very simple, it is too close to the sea, which is very beneficial for the Japanese army, to use the advantages of the navy to consume ****. In addition, there is the problem of the capital Nanjing. In the opinion of the military, this city is to consume the opponent's use and give it up when it is unacceptable. Edel looked at the results given by the Romanian military inside. Although the Romanian military has become more and more capable in recent years, they still don't know much about the battle in the Far East, and a lot of thinking is based on the European model. Edel looked at the erroneous deduction report, thought about it, and called the guard. Let them redo it. Tell them if they don't understand, just send a telegram and ask Lieutenant General Mordelk, who is more familiar with the Far East. Edel watched the guards leave, thinking of the reckless use of poison gas by the Japanese army, and called a new guard. I called Ambassador ZHU of the Republic of China and said that Romania wants to sell a batch of military supplies. No way, thinking of those heroic warriors using towels to resist the poisonous gas of the enemy. Edel felt that he needed to do something. Of course, this also has a lot to do with the fact that the gas mask is not too expensive. If it is too expensive, I will be embarrassed to give it. He still understands the principle of being diligent and diligent for nothing. Speaking of gas masks, don't look at this thing as not big, and the value is not high, but it is an essential military material. Before Kang Xiang's visit group only bought 8,000 gas masks, which is not enough for the army. This also has a lot to do with the fact that the Civil War has always been a civil war before, and they don't know much about poison gas, and Edel didn't want to wait until the Japanese army used it recklessly before the Republic of China remembered what was missing. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 648, Merger of Germany and Austria. Time past 1937 and the Sino-Japanese War, and the biggest focus of this year was the Sino-Japanese War. Similar to the history, the principal still decided to fight the Japanese army in Shanghai. The difference is that the Sanghu battle was not just fought for 3 months, but has not ended yet. At present, millions of China and Japan gather in the Suzhou-Shanghai area to fight, and the casualties on the two sides are 350,000 and 60,000 respectively. According to Lieutenant General Modelk's report, the Nanjing side intends to withdraw its troops in view of the huge casualties in the battle between the Soviet Union and Shanghai. In this Battle of Sanghu, all the roads engineers participated in the battle. It was their participation in the battle that kept the Japanese army from breaking through. However, at present, more than half of the roads have lost their ability to continue fighting. The Nanjing government saw that its most elite troops were no longer able to fight, so they made the decision to abandon Shanghai and other places. Fortunately, the ordnance purchased from Romania has already landed in Guangzhou. The roads mechanic who supplemented the equipment believes that in the next battle, there must be a better performance point. When the time entered 1938, a major event took everyone's attention away from the smoked land of the Far East. Germany announced its merger with Austria. Since the disintegration of the Holy Roman Empire, also known as the First German Reich, it has been the dream of many Germans to build a unified country around the Germanic people, centered on German culture. It was this dream that made the Second Reich of Germany. But with the end of World War I and the fall of the Second German Empire and Austria-Hungary, the dream of establishing a great power centered on German culture seems to have come to nothing. But at this time, Germany and Austria, which have the same cultural roots, have some unified voices. And the momentum is growing, and the power of the German-Austrian merger has resurfaced, but the two countries have always maintained a marginal position. However, Article 80 of the Treaty of Versailles, in order to punish the defeated country, explicitly denied the possibility of German-Austrian merger. Although not immediately successful, the German-Austrian merger has since become an important issue in Austrian politics, and the parliament has been divided into two factions. A section of the Social Democrats supported the merger, while the Christian Democrats, out of fear of German Protestantism, resisted the merger. In Germany, the German-Austrian merger is the only option for the Communist Party. Hitler, who was born in Austria, bluntly stated in Mein Kampf, German-Austria must return to Germany, not for any economic reasons. Even if this merger has no economic benefits or even only disadvantages, we must insist on the merger. Same blood, same empire. In the 1930s, the Austrian Communist Party became more and more powerful in parliamentary elections. In the face of repression by the authorities, they have carried out several terrorist attacks and anti-repression campaigns across the country. In 1934, with Hitler's approval, the Austrian Communist Party assassinated Prime Minister Dollfuss in an attempt to stage a coup. Although the ending ended in failure, it was a big earthquake for the Austrian political situation at the time. German-Austrian mergers and dictatorships became an almost unstoppable trend. Austrian authorities have pursued a cautious semi-appeasement foreign policy toward Germany in exchange for independence. However, Hitler continued to pressure the Austrian government to recognize the legal status of the Austrian Communist Party, and even let the Austrian Communist Party participate in political affairs. The reason for Hitler to do this, in addition to the urgent need to unite the German nation, is that he saw the weakness of Britain and France and the militarization of the Rhine, which made him more urgent to merge Austria. Of course, the Austro-German agreement signed in July 1936 was also an important step in Hitler's annexation of Austria. The agreement stipulated that Germany recognized Austrian sovereignty, but in its relations with Germany, the policy it forced the Austrian government to implement was based on the fact that Austria was a German state. Austria was actually subject to German foreign policy. In January 1938, the Austrian militants received instructions from Berlin to prepare for a rebellion. On February 4, Germany announced the reorganization of the central authority and the supreme command of the armed forces. Hitler concentrated the powers of head of state and commander-in-chief into his own hands. Germany begins its merger plan with Austria. On February 7, Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg was invited to Hitler's residence in Berchtesgaden. In order to intimidate the Austrian Chancellor, Keitel reported to the Führer that the Germans were preparing to invade Austria. Hitler forced Schuschnigg to sign a letter of agreement which in effect stipulated establishing German control over Austrian foreign policy, legitimizing the activities of the Austrian National Socialists, and appointing a series of Austrian militants to key government positions. The key positions of Interior Minister and Public Safety Minister were to be ceded to Hitler's deputy Seyss-Inquart. This effectively meant the cancellation of Austria's sovereign independence. Faced with pressure from Hitler, the desperate Schuschnigg announced on March 9 that a referendum on Austria's future would be held 3 days later. This made Germany's attempt to invade Austria by peaceful means in danger of failure. Faced with such a risk, Hitler demanded the immediate implementation of Otto's plan, the invasion of Austria. Austria tried to get the British and French rescue before, but was flatly refused. So faced with this situation, the Austrian government surrendered. After Britain and France refused to accept Austria's request for help, the German army began to rush all the way to Vienna. After the Germans occupied Vienna, Hitler signed an order declaring Austria a province of Germany. In fact, the Germans were matched across the German-Austrian border, not only did not encounter any military resistance, but also received cheers, applause, ceremonies, flags, and flowers from the residents. Therefore, this aggression is also known as the War of Flowers. Austria was so easily brought under German control. A triumphant Hitler declared in Vienna. It is a common feeling for all other Germans. No matter what happens, the unified German Empire that we claim today will never be divided by anyone, and will never be divided. The annexation of Austria has expanded the German territory by 17% and the population by 10%, making the German chariot even stronger. The merger of Germany and Austria has made the smoke in Europe more intense, and it has also made more people worry about the future of Europe. In Romania, however, little attention has been paid to the German-Austrian merger. Because Edel is preparing for a major event, the impact of this event is not much worse than the German-Austrian merger, that is the merger of Romania and Bulgaria, and Edel intends to take this opportunity to bring the two kingdoms together. There has never been a better time than when Europe's eyes were held back by the German-Austrian merger. Chapter 649 Merger 1. In the busy Prime Minister's office, Kirsteff is busy processing various documents. Alakov, how did you do this plan? Didn't you tell you that you must include the cost? Why did you forget it? Now, go and make it again for me. What's going on with the Burgos government's budget report? Do they think the government has too much money to spend? Tell the finance minister Morkanov, don't keep pushing everything to me. He's worried about this, worry about that. If he is like this, the finance minister, don't do it. Don't think that we are a political party and I will be polite to him. Don't even think about it. Along with Christoph's work is his voice, which is now not only temperamental, but also getting louder and louder. No way. As Edel left Sofia and returned to Bucharest, he found that many government officials were becoming increasingly disrespectful. As a responsible prime minister, he certainly wouldn't get used to them. Therefore, these officials were severely punished, who knew that this would be a pain in the hornet's nest. If the bright ones don't come, the dark ones will come, and any problems will be reported. Of course, Kirsteff is getting busier and busier, but he is not a vegetarian, and whoever goes too far will be replaced. In the past 2 years, Bulgarian government officials have been replaced by 18%, but the situation is still under his control. With a knock on the door, the secretary came in. Prime Minister, everyone is due. Okay, I'll be right here. Putting down the pen in his hand, Kirsteff followed the secretary to the conference room, where a crucial meeting was waiting for him. In the conference room, the ministers who have gathered together are also chatting. Romtok, your transportation department is so busy, you can still gain weight. The minister of transportation who was stopped was a fat man with a wide body and a fat body. And he replied with a sweat on his forehead. What can I do about this? Now I need to change 3 pairs of shoes a month, but I just can't lose weight. Unlike your Ministry of Health and Education, where I just stay in the office every day, I run around every day now and rarely go home. I think it's not that you don't want to go home, but that you don't dare to go back. Your momina has been reported in the newspapers. This is slander. I have nothing to do with that momina at all. Romtok, who was provoked, quickly denied it. There is no such thing as a lover, as long as they are not caught. Who can admit it? Boom. As the door to the conference room was opened, the lively scene just now disappeared immediately, and Prime Minister Kirst walked away with a sullen face. He turned a blind eye to the lively scene before and said directly, "Now for a meeting." Looking at the quiet conference room, he took the lead. "You all know the content of this meeting. No. Learn. After getting everyone's response, Kirst continued, "Now that everyone knows it, then we need to make a wave of the whole Bulgaria, agree to merge with the Romanian counterparty. Mythilk, you should strengthen your control of public opinion. I don't want to hear any opposition from the media during this time." Mythilk, who was named, replied with an unnatural expression, "I try my best. It's not as much as possible. It must be done. Do you have any questions?" Seeing Mythilk with an unnatural expression, Kirst looked at him angrily. No problem. Mythilk, who was finally defeated by Krustev's vision, succumbed. And Mythilk's attitude, so that Kirst is very dissatisfied. I saw him slap the table sharply, making everyone pay attention to him. I know some of you are unhappy with this, seeing it as a betrayal of Bulgarian traditions, thinking that Bulgaria was annexed by Romania. I don't want to explain it here, because it's not true. We are a union, not someone annexing someone. It's a very important point, and I think you should too. What is annexation? You should know. Before we were annexed by the Eastern Roman Empire, and by the Ottoman Empire. That feeling, I believe no one will ever forget it. And this merger with the Kingdom of Romania is an opportunity for us in Bulgaria, an opportunity to bring all Bulgarians together in one country. Although we are not the only Bulgarians in this kingdom, this is the best chance for us. Because we in Bulgaria alone cannot fulfill such a wish, we can only rely on the help of others. While this opportunity doesn't seem to fit the pattern we've been thinking about, it's still an opportunity. And this opportunity is so close at hand, it is worth a try. In the end, Krustov gave a choice. Now I give everyone a chance. Those who are willing to create the future with me sit down, and those who are unwilling can leave. You can make a choice. Krustov's remarks let everyone know his determination this time around, and the style of this guy is clear to them, after working together for so long. For those who dare to block him, his revenge is enough to make people pee their pants. So there is only one choice this time, and that is to stay still, or those who leave the next day will be ruined. Seeing that no one had left, Kirst continued, "Since everyone is reluctant to leave, it means that we have the same idea. Next, every request I have must be fulfilled, otherwise I will be very angry, which is not good for everyone. Mythilk, tell me loudly if there is any problem." Mythilk, who was suddenly named, was startled, and he quickly replied loudly, "No problem, Your Excellency." Krstff was very satisfied with Mythilk's answer. Next, he clicked the names of all the people present. No one dared to oppose the gloomy Prime Minister, and all of them gave satisfactory answers. Finally Krustov said, "Since everyone has no problem, then go and complete their respective tasks. I would like to remind everyone here that I will be very angry if anyone fails to complete the task this time." In the strong aura of the Prime Minister, all of you who agreed to make promises immediately left like birds and beasts fled. Felikov, wait a minute. Krstff suddenly stopped someone. Felikov, who was stopped, watched the others leave and replied, "Okay, Your Excellency." After everyone had left, Felikov glanced at the closed door and said, "Prime Minister, you are playing with fire like this at this time." The Prime Minister, who had a completely calm face, was completely indifferent. "If you don't force them, this matter will not be completed. And for the merger, I have already bet everything. The great cause of Bulgarian reunification. Let us wait too long. I can't wait any longer." Felilakov's heart moved, and he said quickly, "Did they agree to our request?" Krustov nodded in response to the question, then extended two fingers. "In 2 years, the combined United Kingdom will make territorial claims to Yugoslavia and Greece." Hearing the Prime Minister's words, Felikov felt short of breath. What if they don't agree, then go to war? The combined kingdom will go to war with both countries. In return for the war, the Bulgarians need to mobilize at least 400,000 people. to join the water again. Lost territory. Velikov was not surprised to hear Prime Minister Kirstov's words, because they were the same kind of people. In order to unify the Bulgarians, they did not mind selling themselves to the devil. Besides, this merger is not without benefits for Bulgaria. At least 1/3 of the positions in the future coalition government will be held by Bulgarians. I believe that the status of Bulgarians in the kingdom will not be low in the future. As Velikov, who shares a common ideal, of course, he knows that the Prime Minister will keep him, and he will not just tell himself the news. So he asked, "What do you need me to do?" Sure enough, Prime Minister Kirstov said in a low voice, "There is no need to keep the remaining opposition parties. You can find a way to get rid of them. When the merger comes, I don't need to hear different voices. Okay, leave this matter to me. It just so happens that I have long disliked them. It's time to let them know how powerful the Ministry of the Interior is." Chapter 650 Merging, Part 2. With the strong control of the government, the domestic public opinion in Bulgaria has shown a one-sided picture on the merger in a newspaper office that expressed dissent. The ground was in a mess, and several staff members looked like they were bruised. I saw dozens of people with ferocious faces blocking the door. One of the leaders, who was obviously the leader, said arrogantly with a bill, "You need to compensate for the damage to my things. Have you seen the price of this thing? Hurry up and get the money, or I will smash your broken newspaper office." The person who was pointed at was a man wearing glasses. He was the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, and he justified anxiously, "It was you who bumped into it, and I didn't break that thing at all. UTM fart. I hit you on purpose. I think you want to repay your debts, and you dare to rely on my debts. You really need to clean up." As he said that, he was about to instruct his subordinates to give the editor-in-chief a good meal and let him know the consequences of defaulting on his debt. What happened? Suddenly, several police officers pushed aside the big man standing at the door and walked in. With the appearance of the police, I saw that the newspaper office seemed to have found its backbone, and the editor-in-chief immediately greeted it. "Sheriff Hawk, these people are blackmailing me, and they want me to pay a high price for what they have damaged." I saw Sheriff Hawk, who used to be very polite to himself, asked the rogue chief beside him without raising his eyelids, "Is it you're wrong, Sheriff?" The rogue leader named Shanku immediately took out a damaged pocket watch and pointed at him. "This is an expensive watch I bought from Switzerland. I still have an invoice. You can't wrong me." I saw this. Sheriff Hawk took the damaged valuable pocket watch and invoice, glanced at it, and said, "This is a civil dispute that needs to be resolved through consultation between you. Our police can't handle it." After he finished speaking, he took his police officer and left in a dashing manner, completely ignoring the reactions of the people behind him. But after the police left, the hoodlum leader showed his white teeth and said sternly, "If you can't get the money, you will pay the newspaper officers compensation. This watch is much more valuable than your broken newspaper office." Sheriff Hawk, who left, walked out of the newspaper office, bent over and ran to a parked car, and said in a low voice, "Everything is done according to your orders." One of the men in the car wearing a trench coat said with satisfaction, "Very well. I will mention your credit to your chief." "I don't dare. I'm just helping the two of you." After the sheriff left, another man beside him spoke, "Ralph, this mission is too easy." I saw this. Ralph said without looking back, "Don't be careless. If something goes wrong, the two of us will be punished to clean the toilet." How could something go wrong? Even if this guy who doesn't know how to live or die can really take out the money to settle the gangster in front of us, we still have the next means. I know that the owner of this newspaper is being pressed by the bank. That's a lot of money. This happens all over Bulgaria, but in different circumstances. These media that express different opinions need to be severely beaten by society, and no one is immune, because the power behind them is not something they can resist. And before these media, the opposition party had a hard time. Inside the People's Party in Sofia, a meeting of all is taking place. Party chairman Belidoyev looked gaunt, because the People's Party has been suppressed from all sides, since the People's Party clearly opposed Edel becoming the king of Bulgaria. With the great development of the Bulgarian economy, the members of the People's Party are decreasing day by day. At present, the number of members of the People's Party is more than 70% less than that before Edel came to power, and all that can remain are the hardcore opposition point, but now they are all worried about Bulgaria's future, because now public opinion is everywhere singing praises for the merger of the two countries. And as the People's Party, which only thinks it loves this country the most, why not worry about it? I saw Belodoyev speak. Do you know about the news that the two kingdoms have merged on the market now? We must not sit idly by and need to unite with other political parties to launch a protest march. Yes, we have to take a stand and let everyone know who is the real patriot. We want to expose the ugly face of the ruling Social Democrats and call on everyone to stand up against them. Belodoyev felt gratified by the words of the high-ranking people of the People's Party present, all of whom are true patriots. I saw him speak. As for the proposal to oppose the march, I think this is feasible. We must not only expose the ugly face of the traitorous government in front of the people, but also support our actions in all countries. I have made contact with Britain and France, and they will support our actions next. Controversial action. Belodoyev was speaking encouraging words when he heard a loud noise outside. Before he could react, the door was kicked open with a bang. I saw that Felikov, the Minister of the Interior, walked in slowly, and with him came the military and police of the Ministry of the Interior. Felikov, what are you doing? Do you know that you are breaking into the headquarters of other legitimate political parties? At one point a high-ranking member of the People's Party looked at Felikov, who had rushed in with a proud face, and immediately scolded him. Facing the scolding from the People's Party, Felikov patted his sleeve, as if sweeping away dust. Legal party? Not anytime soon. When he waved his hand, the military police brought in a young man whose shirt was still stained with blood. Everyone in the room exclaimed, because the young man was Belodoyev's nephew Lurks. Seeing that his nephew was brought in with bloodstains, Belodoyev looked very bad. What have you done to my nephew? Ferakov, and Belodoyev's words just made Felikov smile proudly, and he grabbed his nephew's hair and let him face everyone present. It seems that Chairman Belodoyev also knows his nephew. So Lurks, tell me why we arrested you. Lurks, who was forced by Ferakov, avoided his uncle's eyes and said a news that surprised everyone. I was caught while transporting a gun. I saw Felikov leaned into Lurks' ear and continued to ask, then tell us who asked you to transport the gun. Lurks, who was firmly fixed by the military and police, did not dare to look at the others and replied with a forceful finger with his head down. He made me do it. It was his uncle Belodoyev who was pointed to by Lurks. Felikov, who got the result he wanted, said with a smile, as a legitimate political party, you smuggle a batch of guns. It seems that you are going to rebel. Our government will never allow such a thing to happen. Saying that, Felikov took out a document and continued to speak. I'm sorry, Belodoyev and the gentleman here. You have been legally arrested on suspicion of armed riot. After Felikov waved his hand, the military police of the brigade rushed in and controlled everyone present. Of course, some of the high-level people of the People's Party present were unwilling to be controlled, but the military and police immediately fell down with a few sticks and immediately became honest. And Belodoyev, who watched the entire performance, looked at Felikov with an angry expression. You are playing with fire. You are opening Pandora's box. Do you know the consequences of doing so? Felikov went up to the chairman and answered him in a voice that both of them could hear. Of course we know, but don't think you are the White Lotus. You are receiving a lot of money from abroad, and you have exceeded the bottom line. Of course, the more important thing is that you are blocking Bulgaria's road. Belodoyev, who was provoked by Ferakov's words, immediately roared. You are betraying your country. You are betraying your country. Unexpectedly, this sentence irritated the interior minister, and he immediately interrupted Belodoyev's words. Shut up. We are much better than you diheads. At least we are still doing things. You only know how to express this dissatisfaction and express that dissatisfaction. Go to prison and express your dissatisfaction. After finishing speaking, Felikov ordered the military police. What are you waiting for? Take it all away. On this day, not only the BJP headquarters was seized, but other opposition parties were also seized. Moreover, The military and police were dispatched from all over the country to wipe out the backbone of these political parties. Faced with the sudden action of the Bulgarian government, no one would have expected such an outcome. However, the Bulgarian government still has a lot to do next, because the referendum is just around the corner. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.